30 seconds? That's what you get? Then I drag you out myself. The bullhorn lowers. Rain hammers the sagging porch roof of 44 Calhoun Street, Charleston, South Carolina. A condemned duplex with boarded windows and a front door that hasn't locked properly since November. Inside, a 26-year-old black man sits on a bare mattress with a shivering dog pressed against his thigh. He does not move toward the door. He does not move toward the window. He counts. 3 voices outside. Male. No police radio chatter, no sirens. Private security, which means no legal authority to enter without a court order. The man who gave the 30-second warning is Brock Tully, 6'3", 240 pounds, private security contractor for Meridian Property Group. He wears a black polo shirt tucked into tactical pants, a laminated badge clipped to his belt that says Meridian Security in block letters, but carries no municipal authority whatsoever. He has been removing people from buildings in this neighborhood for 7 months. He has never once produced a warrant. The dog whimpers. The man, Micah Langston, according to the name he signs at the Palmetto Street shelter every morning, places one hand on the animal's back, steadies it, then reaches for the condemnation notice stapled to the wall beside the doorframe. He reads it in the dark, lips barely moving. City of Charleston, Bureau of Housing Inspection. Condemnation Order. Number 24-0791. Issued March 3, 2025. Property deemed unfit for habitation per International Property Maintenance Code, Section 108.1.1. Violation. Structural failure, electrical hazard, rodent infestation. Signed, Inspector Preston Howell, badge number 4417, issued this morning. But the building has been occupied, by Micah, by 2 other men who rotate through the back unit, for 3 weeks. No inspector has entered during that time. No one has tested the wiring. No one has checked the foundation. The notice appeared sometime between midnight and dawn, stapled while the occupants slept. That is not how condemnation works. Outside, Brock racks the bullhorn again. Time's up. Footsteps on the porch. 3 sets. Heavy. The floorboards groan under the weight. Then something Micah does not expect. A woman's voice, sharp and clear, cutting through the rain. "Stand down, Brock. We're not going in there." Silence. The dog whimpers once. The doorknob turns, slowly, testing, then stops. Whoever tried it realized the same thing Micah already knew. Without a police officer present and a valid court-ordered vacate directive, entering this building would be criminal trespass. Even for Meridian. The knob releases. Footsteps retreat. An engine starts. Headlights sweep across the boarded window, throwing slats of white light across the mattress. The dog, the man sitting perfectly still with a condemnation notice in his hand and something unreadable in his eyes. He folds the notice, places it inside his backpack, not crumpled, not tossed. Folded along precise lines, tucked into a specific pocket, beside a journal filled with dates and numbers and observations that no homeless drifter would have any reason to keep. The rain keeps falling. The dog settles. Micah does not sleep. If you think you know what's happening in this story, you don't. Not even close. Stay right here. 3 weeks earlier, the morning had started the way every morning started, with a roster and a plastic tray. The Palmetto Street shelter opened its breakfast line at 6 a.m. sharp. Micah was always 4th or 5th in line. Never first, that drew attention. Never last. That suggested someone who didn't care about eating, which was its own kind of conspicuous. 4th or 5th, routine, invisible. He signed the roster. Printed his name clearly, Micah Langston, in the same slightly unsteady handwriting he'd been using for 3 months. Took his tray. Powdered eggs, white toast, apple juice in a paper cup. Sat in the corner seat nearest the emergency exit, back to the wall, sightline to both the front entrance and the hallway leading to the administrative offices. He ate slowly. Watched everything. The shelter held 42 beds and served breakfast to anyone who walked in, resident or not. This morning, there were maybe 30 people in the dining area. Micah knew most of them by name. Gerald, who talked to himself about baseball scores from 1987. Tanya and her daughter, who'd been on the wait list for transitional housing since January. Old Maurice, 71, diabetic, whose insulin had been delayed by Medicaid paperwork for 2 weeks running. These were the people Meridian Property Group didn't count when they filed development permits. After eating, Micah cleared his tray, nodded to the kitchen volunteer, a retired teacher named June who always gave him an extra piece of toast without being asked, and walked outside. 6 blocks. That was his morning route. 6 blocks through the East Side neighborhood, from the shelter on Palmetto to the intersection of Calhoun and East Bay, then back along King Street, every morning, rain or shine, 3 months running. But Micah did not walk these blocks the way a man walks when he has nowhere to be. He paused at the first condemned building on Calhoun, a shotgun house with plywood over the windows and a Meridian Property Group development sign wired to the fence. He pulled out his phone, photographed the gas meter, then the electric meter, then the water meter, compared the readings to a column of numbers in a pocket journal. Small, spiral-bound, the kind you could buy at any dollar store. The gas meter had moved, 12 cubic feet since yesterday, in a building that was supposedly empty and disconnected. He wrote the number down, moved to the next property, 4 houses condemned on this block alone. 3 of them showed utility activity inconsistent with vacancy. He photographed each meter, recorded each reading, noted the time, 7:22 a.m., 7:29 a.m., 7:35 a.m., and kept walking. No one photographed utility meters for fun. No one kept a journal of gas readings unless those readings were evidence of something. But Micah Langston, as far as anyone in this neighborhood knew, was just a quiet young man who slept in condemned buildings, ate at the shelter, and did odd jobs for cash. Thin, polite, kept to himself, wore clothes from the donation bin, a gray hoodie 2 sizes too large, jeans with a tear at the left knee, boots from a Salvation Army in North Charleston. He looked like someone the world had already forgotten. He moved like someone who had never forgotten a single thing. The east side was changing. You could see it in the scaffolding. 3 construction cranes visible from any intersection, steel skeletons rising where row houses used to stand. Meridian Property Group signage on every other lot. Luxury living coming soon. Modern Charleston. East Side reimagined. What they were reimagining was a neighborhood that had been black since Reconstruction. The longtime residents were leaving, not by choice. Eviction notices arriving without warning. Buildings condemned overnight. Water shut off for maintenance that never seemed to end. Property tax reassessments that tripled in a single year, pushing fixed-income homeowners into default. A slow, methodical erasure dressed up in the language of progress and community improvement. Micah had watched it from the inside for 91 days, had mapped it, cataloged it, documented every condemnation order, every utility shut-off, every complaint that went unanswered by the city's housing bureau. He turned onto East Bay Street and nearly collided with Miss Odalis Benning. She was 74, small, fierce, sitting on her front porch in a wicker chair with a glass of sweet tea, watching the construction traffic the way a general watches an approaching army. "Morning, baby." She didn't look at him when she said it. Her eyes were on the demolition crew working 3 houses down, another shotgun bungalow reduced to splinters and dust. "They got the Freeman place last night, signed the papers Tuesday, gone by Friday." Micah set his backpack down on the bottom step. He'd replaced her porch railing last week. The old one had rotted through, and Meridian's property management company had ignored 6 repair requests. He'd done it with lumber from a demolished site down the block. No charge. How long did the Freemans live there? 38 years. Cedric Freeman built that front porch with his own hands in 1991. Used to sit there every evening till he passed. His daughter tried to keep it, but... She took a sip of tea. Meridian offered her $18,000, house appraised at $210,000. She took it? They condemned the building 2 days after she said no. Inspector showed up, spent 10 minutes inside, declared it structurally unsound. Cedric built that house on a concrete slab with hurricane ties on every rafter. That man was an engineer. But the city says it's falling down. Her voice carried the particular bitterness of someone who had watched this pattern repeat too many times to call it coincidence. Then they shut her water off. "Maintenance issue," they said. "Maintenance issue that only affects the houses Meridian wants to buy." Micah said nothing. He'd heard this story, variations of it, from 11 different residents in 3 months. The details changed. The pattern didn't. "My turn's coming," Miss Odalis said. Not a question, a statement of fact. "They already sent someone to reassess my property taxes. Man walked around my yard with a clipboard, didn't even knock. I watched him from this chair. Did you get his name?" Didn't give one, but he was driving a white Meridian truck. Micah pulled out his phone, took a photograph of the demolition across the street, the date and time stamped automatically. Then photographed Miss Odalis's house from the sidewalk, the intact porch, the maintained yard, the house that was not falling down. "You take a lot of pictures for someone with nowhere to go," Miss Odalis observed. Not accusatory, curious. "Habit," Micah said, and left it at that. The community meeting that evening confirmed what Micah had been tracking for weeks. The pressure was accelerating. The Eastside Neighborhood Association met at 7 p.m. in the basement of the community center on Spring Street. Fluorescent lights, folding chairs, a podium with a microphone that squealed feedback every time someone leaned too close. Maybe 50 people, split roughly in half. Longtime black residents on one side, newer white homeowners and renters on the other. The divide wasn't absolute, but it was visible. Vivian Lockhart presided. She stood at the podium in a cream blazer and pearl earrings, reading from a printed agenda with the practiced ease of someone who had run these meetings for 3 years and never once lost control of the room. Mid-50s, white, articulate, smiled frequently. The smile did not reach her eyes. Thank you all for coming. We have a packed agenda tonight. First item, the beautification initiative for the Spring Street corridor. As you know, the city approved funding for new streetlights and sidewalk repairs last month. Installation begins in April. Polite applause from the newer residents. Silence from the longtime homeowners, who knew that beautification in this neighborhood had historically preceded displacement. Second item. Vivian paused. The smile tightened. Safety concerns. We've received multiple reports about unauthorized individuals occupying condemned structures in the neighborhood. I want to be clear. This is a compassion issue. These buildings are dangerous. Exposed wiring, structural instability, no running water. People sleeping in these conditions are putting themselves at serious risk. She did not look at Micah when she said this. She didn't need to. Half the room turned to find him sitting in the back row, backpack on the floor between his feet, hands folded in his lap. The association has drafted a petition requesting increased police patrols in the area surrounding condemned properties, not to criminalize anyone. Another smile, another flash of teeth that didn't match the eyes, but to ensure that these individuals are connected with proper shelter resources and that our community remains safe. A hand went up in the third row. Miss O'Dallas. O'Dallas, we'll have a public comment period at the... My comment is now. Miss O'Dallas stood. She was 5'2" and spoke with the authority of someone who had been attending these meetings since before Vivian Lockhart knew this neighborhood existed. You want to talk about safety? My water's been off for 9 days. 9 days? No notice. No repair crew. I called the city 4 times. Know what they told me? Maintenance issue. What's the association doing about that? Vivian's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened on the podium's edge. O'Dallas, utility issues are handled through the city's public works department. The association doesn't have jurisdiction over... You have jurisdiction over a petition to put police on my block, but you can't make a phone call about my water? A murmur rippled through the longtime residents' side of the room, heads nodding. Someone said, "That's right," quietly enough to maintain deniability. Vivian recovered. I understand the frustration. I do. But tonight's agenda is about the safety petition. If there are utility concerns, I'd encourage you to... I've been encouraged plenty. I need water. The tension held for 3 seconds. Then Vivian pivoted. Not to resolution, but to redirection. Thank you, O'Dallas. We'll follow up with you individually. Now, regarding the petition. Her gaze swept the room and landed briefly on Micah. We've all noticed unfamiliar faces in the neighborhood. People sleeping in condemned structures. I'm not pointing fingers, but it's a liability issue. For their safety. She paused to let the emphasis land. I'd like to suggest the shelter relocate its overflow services to a facility in West Ashley. There's a building on Savannah Highway that's a 40-minute bus ride. This from a younger woman, black, mid-30s, sitting near the aisle. Micah had seen her before. She ran an informal food pantry from her garage on Thursdays. You want to bus homeless people out of the neighborhood instead of fixing the buildings they're sleeping in? I want to ensure everyone has access to proper services. The East Side doesn't have the infrastructure to... The East Side had the infrastructure until Meridian tore half of it down. The room split along its invisible line. Newer residents murmuring about process and proper channels. Longtime residents who had watched proper channels deliver nothing but demolition permits and rising taxes. Micah sat in the back row, said nothing. His eyes tracked every speaker, every reaction, every name on the sign-in sheet, which he'd photographed when he entered. Casually, phone held low, the gesture of someone checking a text message. Then Vivian changed targets. I want to bring up something else. We've received reports, not formal complaints, just concerned observations, about an individual who has been entering multiple condemned structures in the neighborhood, photographing buildings, asking residents personal questions about their property and finances. She paused. Let the description settle into the room. I don't want to name anyone, but I think we all know who I'm referring to. Every head in the room turned toward Micah. The silence was specific, the held-breath silence of a crowd watching someone get singled out and waiting to see if they'd break. If this individual would like to address the association, the floor is open. Micah did not stand, did not shift in his chair. From his seat in the back row, his voice carried clearly across the room without raising. I sleep where the law allows. Condemned structures without active demolition orders remain accessible under South Carolina trespass law. The posted notice on Calhoun Street doesn't include a court-ordered vacate directive. I checked. The room went quiet. Not silent, quiet. The difference between absence of sound and the presence of people recalculating what they'd just heard. A homeless man citing property law, citing it accurately, citing it the way someone who had read the statute cited it, not someone who had heard it secondhand. Vivian recovered. The smile returned, tighter now, stretched over something harder. Well, I'm sure the city will address that oversight. A man in the second row, newer resident, white, khaki shorts and a polo, the uniform of someone who had moved to the east side for the character and the property values, turned around in his chair and looked at Micah with open contempt. Maybe if you spent less time memorizing laws and more time looking for a job, you wouldn't need to sleep in condemned buildings. The words hung. Micah looked at the man, didn't respond. The non-response was its own kind of answer, the refusal to dignify cruelty with engagement, but the man took it as weakness and pressed. Seriously, there are shelters, there are programs. Why are you here? Miss Odalis stood again. He's here because this is his neighborhood too. He fixed my porch railing when Meridian wouldn't return my calls. You've been living here how long? 8 months? Sit down. The man sat. Not because he agreed, but because Miss Odalis's voice carried the authority of 4 decades of residency, and even contempt has limits when confronted with history. Vivian called for a vote on the petition. It passed, 31-19. The newer residents had the numbers. The petition would go to the City Council's Public Safety Committee. Micah noted the date, March 8th. The meeting broke up at 8:45 p.m. People filed out in clusters, the two sides of the room barely mixing. Micah collected his backpack, headed for the door. Vivian intercepted him. I don't think we've met. The smile again, hand extended. Vivian Lockhart, I run the association. He shook her hand, brief. Micah? Just Micah? Just Micah. She tilted her head, studying him. The smile didn't waver, but something behind it was calculating, sorting, filing. Are you staying at the Palmetto shelter? Sometimes. Well, if you need anything, job referrals, housing applications, the association has a resource table. No, we're here to help. She pressed a business card into his hand. Ivory cardstock, gold lettering. Vivian Lockhart, President, Eastside Neighborhood Association. Below that, in smaller type, Community Liaison, Meridian Property Group. Micah looked at the card, looked at Vivian, put the card in his pocket without comment. He walked home, if you could call it that, through streets that smelled like sawdust and diesel from the day's demolition work. The rain had started again, light but steady, the kind of spring rain that soaked through a hoodie in 10 minutes. 3 blocks from the duplex, he heard the sound. A whimper, high-pitched, coming from the alley behind a demolished row house on King Street, where the foundation was all that remained, a concrete rectangle filled with standing water and construction debris. Micah stopped, listened. Another whimper, weaker. He stepped into the alley. The light from the street lamp barely reached past the first dumpster. He pulled out his phone, switched on the flashlight, and swept the beam across the rubble. The dog was pressed against the base of a chain-link fence, half submerged in a puddle that had pooled in a tire rut. Medium-sized, brown and white. Mutt, maybe some hound, maybe some shepherd, impossible to tell with the fur matted flat by rain. It was shivering so hard its teeth chattered, a sound almost human in its misery. No collar, no tags. Limping on the front left paw, Micah knelt, slowly, kept his hands visible, the way you do with an animal that might bolt or bite. He fished the last half of a granola bar from his jacket pocket, dinner technically, or what was left of it, and held it out. The dog's nose worked, eyes locked on the food, then on Micah, then on the food again. It took 30 seconds. Then the dog crept forward, belly low to the ground, and took the granola bar from his palm with a gentleness that belied its size. While it ate, Micah examined the paw. Thorn, deep, embedded between the pads, not broken. He pulled it out with his thumbnail and forefinger, quick and clean, and the dog yelped once but didn't snap. Then he tore a strip from the bottom of his own shirt, the gray hoodie, already fraying at the hem, and wrapped the paw, snug but not tight. Field dressing, the kind of wrap that suggested practice. He picked up the dog. It was heavier than it looked, 40 pounds, maybe 45. Carried it 6 blocks back to the duplex, through the rain, up the sagging porch steps, through the door that didn't lock. Inside, he set the dog on a flattened cardboard box that served as a bed, poured water from his bottle into a takeout container. The dog drank until the container was empty, then looked up at Micah with the particular gratitude of a creature that had been alone long enough to forget what kindness felt like. He refilled the container, sat down on the mattress. The dog climbed up beside him, pressed its wet body against his leg, and sighed. A long, shuddering exhale that seemed to release something it had been holding for days. Micah placed one hand on the dog's back, felt the ribs beneath the fur, felt the heartbeat, fast but slowing. He didn't know whose dog this was. He didn't know it mattered. Morning. The flyer was taped to a telephone pole on East Bay Street, eye level, laminated against the rain. Lost dog. Duke. Reward, $5,000. The photo showed a brown and white mutt with one ear that flopped and one that stood straight. Medium build. The dog currently sleeping on a cardboard bed in a condemned duplex on Calhoun Street. Micah read the flyer twice. The contact information listed a local number and the name of a hotel, the Bellman Charleston place, downtown. The kind of hotel that charged $600 a night and had doormen who would absolutely not let Micah Langston through the front entrance. $5,000. He stood on the sidewalk and thought about what $5,000 meant to a homeless man. New clothes, a deposit on an apartment, 3 months of stability, the kind of money that changed trajectories. He also thought about what $5,000 meant to his cover. A homeless drifter suddenly carrying a stack of 50s would generate exactly the kind of attention that 3 months of careful invisibility had been designed to avoid. People would ask where it came from. People would remember his face. People connected to Meridian would wonder why the quiet man in the back row of the neighborhood meeting was suddenly flush. The calculation took less than 5 seconds. He would return the dog. He would not take the reward. The walk to the Bellman took 20 minutes. Micah carried Duke in his arms. The dog's paw was healing but still tender, and letting it walk on downtown sidewalks risked re-injury. The picture was striking. A young black man in a torn hoodie and stained jeans, carrying a 40-pound dog through Charleston's tourist district at 9 in the morning. People stared. Some stepped aside. One woman pulled her child closer. The Bellman's lobby was marble and mahogany, the kind of space designed to make people like Micah feel the distance between where they were and where they belonged. He walked through the revolving door and was intercepted in 4 seconds. "Sir!" The security guard, white, mid-40s, blazer over a polo shirt, earpiece, stepped directly into his path. "This is a private hotel. Are you a guest?" "No. I found this dog. It belongs to someone staying here." Micah held Duke so the guard could see the face that matched the flyer. The lost dog posters are all over the east side. The guard looked at the dog, looked at Micah. The assessment was visible. Clothes, skin, posture, the rapid calculation of threat level based on appearance rather than behavior. "Wait here." Micah waited. In the lobby, standing. No one offered him a seat. The concierge glanced up from her desk, made eye contact, looked away. A couple in matching linen walked past, giving him the wide berth usually reserved for wet paint or open manholes. 7 minutes passed. Then 10. Then the elevator opened, and a woman came out fast, mid-30s, black, dressed in the particular uniform of a personal assistant to someone important. Tailored but functional, phone in one hand, the other hand already reaching. She saw Duke and stopped. "Oh my God! Duke!" The dog's tail exploded into motion. He wriggled in Micah's arms, straining toward the woman, who was already on her knees on the marble floor with her arms open. Micah set Duke down. The dog launched himself at her, licking her face, his entire body vibrating with recognition. Where did you find him?" She was crying. Not dramatic crying, the quiet, overwhelmed kind, the release of 36 hours of fear. "Alley off King Street last night. His paw was hurt. Thorn, I pulled it out and wrapped it." She looked at the bandage, the strip of gray hoodie neatly tied. "You did this yourself?" "It's just a field dressing. He should probably see a vet to make sure there's no infection." The phrase sat oddly in the air. Field dressing. Not, "I wrapped it up." Not, "I put a bandage on it." Field dressing, a term with specific connotations that a homeless 26-year-old probably shouldn't know. Before the woman could respond, the elevator opened again. Sterling Cade was taller in person than he looked on screen. 6'2", broad-shouldered, the kind of physical presence that made rooms recalibrate when he entered. 3-time Oscar nominee, 44 years old, currently in Charleston for a 6-week film shoot. He was wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt, and the expression of a man who had not slept well. He saw Duke and dropped to his knees on the marble floor beside his assistant, and a sound came out of him. Not words, just relief, raw and unfiltered, as the dog buried its face in his neck. "Rhea, where? How?" This young man found him. Rhea gestured toward Micah, who was standing exactly where he'd been standing for 10 minutes, backpack over one shoulder, waiting to leave. Sterling looked up. His eyes were wet. "Man, I've had people searching since yesterday. Every shelter, every vet clinic, every park. What's your name?" "Micah." "Micah." Sterling stood, Duke cradled in one arm like a child. He extended his free hand. Micah shook it. "I can't. You have no idea. This dog is my daughter's whole world. She's been calling me every hour. How did you find him?" "He was in an alley, hurt, scared. I took him home and took care of him." "The reward?" $5,000. "Let me get it for you right now." "Rhea, can you—" "I appreciate it." Micah stepped back. One step. Small. Definitive. "But I'd rather not have anything documented." The word hung. Sterling's head tilted slightly. The actor's instinct, the reader of human behavior, catching something in the frequency of the statement that didn't match the broadcast. A homeless man declining $5,000 was unusual. A homeless man declining it because he didn't want anything documented was something else entirely. "Documented," Sterling repeated. "Paperwork, tax forms. I'd rather keep things simple." The explanation was plausible. Plenty of people living off the grid avoided paper trails for perfectly ordinary reasons. Warrants, child support, immigration status, the simple desire to be left alone. Sterling accepted it, reluctantly. "At least let me buy you lunch, dinner, something." "I'm good. Take care of Duke." Micah shifted his backpack, turned toward the revolving door. "He likes granola bars, by the way, the oat kind." He walked out, through the lobby where no one had offered him a seat, past the security guard who had stopped him at the door, into the Charleston morning, where the humidity was already thick enough to chew, and the construction cranes along the east side skyline turned like slow mechanical birds, searching for something they'd already consumed. He made it half a block before the hand closed around his arm. "Hey!" Brock Tully, standing beside a Meridian security truck that was parked in a loading zone outside the hotel. He'd been watching. From the truck, from the sidewalk. It didn't matter. He'd seen Micah enter the Belmond, and the sight of a condemned building squatter walking into a 4-star hotel had tripped something in his professional paranoia. "You're the one sleeping in the Calhoun Street duplex." Not a question. A statement delivered with the authority of someone who believed that knowing where a person slept was the same as owning them. "You got 30 seconds to explain why you're in a 4-star hotel." Brock's hand tightened on Micah's arm. The grip was excessive, fingers digging into the bicep, thumb pressing against the nerve cluster above the elbow. A pain compliance technique taught in security training courses and prohibited by most legitimate firms. Applied casually, the way someone squeezes a stress ball. Micah did not pull away, did not tense, did not swing. He looked at Brock's hand on his arm, then up at Brock's face, and his expression was so utterly calm that it functioned as its own kind of provocation. "I returned a lost dog. The owner is a guest." "A lost dog?" Brock leaned closer. His breath smelled like energy drinks and chewing tobacco. "You expect me to believe some bum walked into the Belmond to return a dog?" "I don't expect you to believe anything. I'm telling you what happened. You can let go of my arm now." "I'll let go when I decide to let go. I see you near any Meridian property again, any building, any lot, any fence with our name on it. We handle it differently. You understand what I'm telling you?" The hotel doorman, an older black man in a burgundy uniform, stepped outside. "Sir, is there a problem?" Brock released Micah's arm. The motion was deliberate, not a retreat, but a demonstration. "I could hold on. I'm choosing to let go." The distinction was a threat in itself. "No problem." Brock walked back to the Meridian truck, climbed in, sat behind the wheel for a moment, watching Micah through the windshield with an expression that promised a future conversation conducted without witnesses. Then he drove away. Micah stood on the sidewalk, rolled his shoulder once. The grip had been hard enough to leave marks. Looked at the doorman, who was watching him with the guarded sympathy of a man who recognized what had just happened but couldn't afford to involve himself further. "Thank you," Micah said. The doorman held the hotel door open for a departing guest, and the moment dissolved into the ordinary choreography of service and deference. Micah walked. 2 blocks, 3. Then he stopped beneath an awning on Meeting Street, pulled out his phone, and spoke quietly. Assault. South Carolina Code Section 16-3-600, 3rd degree, documented. He did not say who he was documenting it for. Every person who walked past Micah on that sidewalk saw a homeless man talking to himself. Not one of them saw what was actually happening. If you're starting to wonder who this man really is, you're asking the right question. Like this video and subscribe. 11 days later, the petition worked. Charleston PD began enhanced community patrols in the east side on March 19th. 3 additional cruisers rotating through the neighborhood between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., with specific instructions to check condemned buildings for unauthorized occupants. The official language called it a public safety initiative. Everyone in the neighborhood knew what it actually was. Vivian Lockhart held a press conference on the steps of the community center. Local news sent 1 camera. She stood in front of a poster that read East Side Safe Neighborhoods and thanked the police department for responding to community concerns. Behind her, visible over her left shoulder, a demolition crew was tearing down the last standing house on the 300 block of Calhoun Street. Micah watched the press conference from across the street, sitting on a bus bench with Duke at his feet. The dog had healed well. The limp was gone, the paw clean. Micah had been feeding him with scraps from the shelter kitchen and leftovers from a restaurant on King Street whose dishwasher, a Haitian man named Eustache, left a bag by the service door every night at 10. The patrols changed everything and nothing. Micah moved out of the Calhoun duplex the first night. Sleeping in a building while police actively searched for you was an unnecessary risk. He rotated between 3 locations: the duplex when patrols passed at predictable intervals, an abandoned van behind the Salvation Army on East Bay, and a maintenance closet in the basement of a church on Wentworth Street, whose custodian, for reasons of his own, left unlocked between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. He kept his routine: morning breakfast at the shelter, 6-block walk, utility meter photographs, notes in the journal. Odd jobs when offered: moving furniture, cleaning gutters, stacking pallets behind the grocery on Spring Street. Cash only, no records, no trail, but Meridian was tightening the perimeter. Brock Tully had added a second security guard, younger, white, crew-cut, name-tag reading Lot, and the 2 of them drove the neighborhood in overlapping loops, stopping whenever they saw someone who didn't look like a property owner. On March 15th, they stopped Miss Odalis. She was sitting on her own porch, the porch Micah had repaired, drinking her morning tea, when the Meridian truck pulled up and Brock stepped out with a clipboard. "Morning, ma'am. We're conducting a community safety survey for the East Side Neighborhood Association. Mind answering a few questions?" "I mind." Miss Odalis set her tea down. "This is my property. Has been since 1984. I don't answer surveys from people who want to buy it out from under me." Brock's smile was professional and empty. "Ma'am, this isn't about property acquisition. It's about community safety. We've had reports of—" "I know what you've had reports of. You've had reports of black people living in their own houses while your company tears down the neighborhood around them. Survey that." Brock wrote something on his clipboard. The gesture was performative, writing in front of someone to make them wonder what's being recorded, what file their name is going into, what consequences might follow from the simple act of sitting on their own porch and refusing to cooperate. He left without another word, but he photographed her house from the sidewalk before he drove away. Miss Odalis saw it happen. She called Micah that evening. "He took pictures of my house, the security man, the big one." "I know." Micah was sitting in the abandoned van, Duke beside him, his journal open on his knee. "I saw the truck on your block at 8:47 a.m. He was there for 6 minutes. Silence on the line. Then, "How'd you know the exact time?" "I pay attention." Another silence. Longer. Miss Odalis was sharp, 74 years old and sharper than half the people in that neighborhood meeting, and she was beginning to sense that the young man who fixed her porch railing and photographed utility meters was not entirely what he appeared to be. "Micah, who are you?" "I'm the guy who fixed your railing." "That's not what I asked." "It's the only answer I've got right now, Miss Odalis, but I promise, I'm not here to cause you trouble." She accepted it, for now, but the question lingered after she hung up, settling into the space between what she could see and what she suspected. March 19th, 7:12 a.m. Micah was inside the Calhoun Street duplex, one of his rotation nights, when he heard the vehicles. Not 1, 3, The sound of diesel engines idling, doors opening, boots on gravel. He was at the window in 2 seconds. Through a gap in the plywood, he could see a City of Charleston Housing Bureau truck, Preston Howell's name stenciled on the door, a Meridian security truck, Brock behind the wheel, and a Charleston PD cruiser, a single officer sitting inside with the engine running. Howell was already on the porch, clipboard in one hand, a document in the other. He knocked. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the empty building like a countdown. Micah opened the door. Howell was mid-50s, white, thin in a way that suggested either discipline or anxiety. Wire-rimmed glasses, city ID badge on a lanyard. The badge read, Preston Howell, Senior Inspector, Bureau of Housing Inspection. He looked at Micah with the particular expression of someone who expected the door to stay closed. Morning, I'm Inspector Howell with the city's Housing Bureau. I'm here to serve a revised condemnation order for this property. He extended the document. Emergency vacate directive. You need to leave the building immediately. Micah took the document, read it. Not quickly, deliberately, line by line, the way someone reads a contract rather than a notice. City of Charleston, Bureau of Housing Inspection, revised condemnation order, case number HB-25-0-3-12. Property, 44 Calhoun Street, inspection date, March 18, 2025, 10 a.m. Method, remote assessment, drone imagery, and exterior thermal scan. Finding, imminent structural collapse. Emergency vacate directive issued per IPMC, Section 108.1.1. Occupants must vacate within 1 hour of service. Micah looked up from the document. This says inspection was conducted March 18th at 10 a.m. That's correct. I was here at 10 a.m. on March 18th. No inspector entered this building. No drone was visible. Howell's expression didn't change, but his weight shifted, slightly backward, a fraction of an inch. The body language of someone recalibrating. Remote assessment doesn't require entry. Drone imagery and thermal scan are sufficient for preliminary condemnation under emergency provisions. IPMC, Section 104.3 requires interior inspection for structural condemnation. Drone imagery alone doesn't satisfy the standard. Where's the engineering assessment? Where are the interior photographs? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Howell stared at Micah. Behind him, Brock Tully had stepped out of the Meridian truck, arms crossed, watching. The police officer in the cruiser hadn't moved. Sir, I don't know where you're getting your information. From your own code. It's posted on the city's website. Micah turned the document over in his hands. What's your badge number? Excuse me? Your badge number. It should be on the order, but I want to confirm it matches your ID. Howell's jaw tightened. His eyes cut to Brock, a quick glance, involuntary, the kind of look shared between people who have coordinated something and are now realizing the coordination might be visible. 4417, he said it flatly. Micah pulled out his phone, photographed the order, front and back, then photographed Howell's badge, then the Meridian truck and its license plate, then the police cruiser and its unit number. Sir, you need to vacate. This is a lawful order. I'm going to vacate, but I'm documenting the condition of the property and the circumstances of this order first. Micah stepped back inside, photographed the interior. Walls, ceiling, floor, electrical panel, plumbing, every room, every angle. The dog followed him, tail wagging, oblivious to the tension. It took 4 minutes. Howell stood on the porch the entire time, clipboard clutched against his chest, his discomfort growing with each flash of Micah's camera. When Micah came back out, he had his backpack on, everything he owned, plus the dog. He stepped off the porch and onto the cracked sidewalk. I'd like the case file reference number for this order, please. Howell gave it. His voice had the texture of someone chewing glass. Micah walked away. Duke trotted beside him, favoring the heeled paw slightly, looking up at Micah every few steps, as if checking that the person carrying him through the world was still there. He made it 10 steps before Brock intercepted. Not with words this time. Brock stepped directly into his path, chest forward, chin up, the posture of a man who wanted collision. Micah stopped. The distance between them was 18 inches, close enough to smell the energy drink on Brock's breath, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. You think you're smart? Brock's voice was barely above a whisper, the kind of quiet that promised violence more convincingly than shouting ever could. Photographing badges, quoting codes, playing lawyer. Micah said nothing. Duke growled at his side, low, sustained, the warning sound of an animal that recognized threat before language could name it. Brock leaned in. His hand came up and shoved Micah's shoulder. A short, sharp push, not hard enough to knock him down, hard enough to establish dominance. To say, I can touch you, anytime, anywhere. Smart people make mistakes in this neighborhood. They trip. They fall. Their stuff gets lost. Their dogs. He looked down at Duke. Let the implication finish itself. Micah's eyes changed. Not his expression, his eyes. Something behind them shifted from patience to something colder. Something that made Brock's next sentence die before it reached his lips. Don't. One word. Flat. No inflection. No explanation needed. Brock held his ground for 3 seconds, then stepped aside. Not because he was afraid, or not entirely, but because Officer Amory was still sitting in the cruiser, and body cameras had a way of capturing things that were meant to stay invisible. Behind them, Brock Tully watched from beside the Meridian truck. His hands were in his pockets. His jaw was working on something. Gum, tobacco, anger. The expression on his face was no longer the casual menace of a security guard managing squatters. It was the focused attention of someone who had just realized that the person he'd been told to remove was not the person he'd assumed. The police officer, Micah had noted the name on the cruiser's unit tag, Officer Kip Amory, badge number 7231, never got out of the car. Micah filed the photographs, updated his journal, ate lunch at the shelter, sat in his corner seat, watched everything. He did not file a complaint. He did not call a lawyer. He did not do any of the things a normal person being illegally evicted would do, because doing those things would force a response from a system that wasn't ready to respond, and he wasn't ready to force it. Not yet. The social media post went up on March 20th at 2:15 p.m. Sterling Cade's Instagram account had 14 million followers. The photo showed Micah from the shoulders up, taken in the hotel lobby, apparently by Rhea, without Micah's knowledge or consent. He was holding Duke. His hoodie was wet from rain. His expression was unguarded, not smiling, not performing, just a young man holding a dog he'd carried through a storm. The caption read, "This young man saved my dog and refused any reward. Wouldn't even take money for food. Charleston, this is what humanity looks like. Take care of your people." 12 million views in 48 hours, 600,000 likes, 42,000 shares. Every local news outlet in South Carolina ran the story. Homeless man saves celebrity's dog, refuses reward. For Sterling Cade, it was a heartfelt gesture, gratitude expressed in the currency of attention. For Micah Langston, it was a catastrophe. He found out when Eustache, the restaurant dishwasher, showed him the post on a cracked smartphone at 10:15 that night. "That's you, brother. You're famous." Micah looked at the photo. His face, his hoodie, his eyes, visible to 14 million people and every algorithm that tracked them. He said nothing. Took the bag of leftovers, walked to the abandoned van behind the Salvation Army, sat in the dark with Duke and the particular kind of fear that comes not from physical danger but from exposure, the stripping away of the careful, patient, methodical invisibility that had taken 3 months to build. His cover was not blown, not yet. The post identified him only as a young man. No name, no location beyond Charleston. But his face was out there. And in a city this size, in a neighborhood this small, faces connected to names, and names connected to addresses, and addresses connected to the buildings that Meridian wanted empty. It took 2 days. On March 22nd, Nadine Creel, leasing coordinator for Meridian Property Group, 37, white, the kind of person who smiled while filing paperwork designed to destroy lives, sat in her office on Broad Street and scrolled through the viral post for the 3rd time. She recognized him, the man from the community meeting, the one who sat in the back row and watched, the one Brock had been told to remove from the Calhoun duplex, the one who'd cited trespass law from memory and photographed condemnation orders like a building inspector. Now he was a social media hero, a sympathetic figure with 12 million witnesses to his existence. She picked up the phone, dialed Brock. "The homeless kid Sterling Cade posted about. That's the same one from Calhoun Street." A pause. Then Brock's voice, tight and calculating. "You sure?" "Positive. Same hoodie, same dog. He's the one who argued with Howell about the inspection code." Another pause. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing visible. Not while he's got a celebrity co-sign. We need to discredit him first, then remove him." "How?" "I'll handle it." She hung up, opened a new browser tab, navigated to the Charleston PD's anonymous tip line, and typed a report, fabricated in every detail, specific enough to be investigated, vague enough to maintain deniability. alleging that an individual matching Micah's description had been seen breaking into a Meridian-owned property on King Street at approximately 2 a.m. on March 21st. Description: black male, mid-20s, slim build, gray hoodie, accompanied by a medium-sized brown and white dog. She submitted the report at 4:47 p.m. By 5:30, it was in the system. The next morning, Officer Kip Amory, the same officer who'd provided civil standby during the Calhoun eviction and never left his cruiser, found Micah at the Palmetto Street shelter during breakfast. "Mr. Langston, I need to speak with you." Micah set down his fork. "Orange juice, half finished. Powdered eggs, untouched." He looked at the officer standing in the shelter's dining area, uniform pressed, body camera on, radio crackling with the ambient noise of a shift just beginning, and his expression did not change. "Am I under arrest?" "No, sir. I'd like to ask you some questions about an incident on King Street." "Am I being detained?" Amory hesitated. The question was specific, not what's going on, or what did I do, but the precise legal inquiry that determined what rights applied in this moment. Detained meant reasonable suspicion. Not detained meant free to leave. "I'd like your voluntary cooperation." "Then I'm happy to cooperate here." Micah gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down." Amory sat. He pulled out a notepad. "We received a report that someone matching your description was seen entering a Meridian Property Group building on King Street in the early morning hours of March 21st. 320 King Street. Can you tell me where you were that night?" "I was here, at the shelter, from 4:07 p.m. on March 20th to 7:02 a.m. on March 21st. The sign-in log will confirm both times. The shelter has security cameras at the main entrance, digital, time-stamped, stored for 60 days, Amory wrote. The specificity of the answer, exact times, exact documentation, the mention of camera retention periods, was not the response of a man who'd been caught. It was the response of a man who had anticipated being asked. "You seem very certain of those times." "I keep a routine." "Have you ever been to 320 King Street?" "I've walked past it. It's on my daily route. I've never entered it." Amory closed his notepad. "I appreciate your cooperation. If we need anything else—" "Officer." Micah's voice was quiet, level. "Who filed this report?" "It was anonymous." "An anonymous report that includes a physical description specific enough to lead you directly to me at the shelter where I eat breakfast every morning, including the dog." Micah paused. "That's not anonymous. That's targeted." Amory's expression flickered, the briefest acknowledgement that Micah's observation was not wrong, before settling back into professional neutrality. "I'm just following up on the report, sir. I understand, and I'm cooperating fully, but I'd like this interaction documented on your body camera, which I notice has been active since you walked in. Case reference number, please." Amory provided it. CPD-25-0-3-22-0-4-7. Micah repeated it back, once, correctly, then returned to his breakfast. Amory left. The shelter dining room resumed its normal rhythms. Gerald talking about baseball, Tanya helping her daughter with a coloring book, June collecting trays. No one asked Micah what the police had wanted. In a shelter, police presence was background noise. Just another Wednesday. But the report was in the system now, a record, a data point. Even unfounded, it attached to Micah's name like a burr, something that could be referenced later, aggregated with other reports, used to build a narrative of a person who attracted police attention, who was associated with property crimes, who was not the sympathetic figure the internet believed him to be. Nadine Creel had not filed a complaint expecting an arrest. She had filed it expecting exactly this, a seed planted in the official record, ready to grow when someone needed it to. The week that followed was the hinge. Sterling Cade, driven by guilt he couldn't name and generosity he couldn't contain, sent Rhea to find Micah. She tracked him to the shelter, left a message with the front desk, and waited outside for an hour. When Micah finally appeared, she was leaning against a rental car with a folder of printouts. "Sterling wants to help," she said. "Hotel room, meal stipend. We can connect you with housing services, job placement. I appreciate it, I really do, but I'm fine." "Micah, you're sleeping in abandoned buildings. With all due respect, that's not fine." "It's temporary." "How temporary?" He didn't answer, just looked at her. A long, steady look that contained something Rhea couldn't quite read. Not desperation, not pride. Something closer to patience. The patience of someone who was waiting for something specific to happen and would not be moved until it did. "Tell Sterling I'm grateful. for the offer and for caring, but the best thing he can do for me right now is nothing." Rhea left. She told Sterling, who did not do nothing. The second Instagram post went up on March 24th, this time with Micah's name, first name only, but enough, and a location tag, Eastside Charleston. Still thinking about Micah, the man who saved Duke and wanted nothing in return. Found out he's been displaced by development in the East Side, one of Charleston's oldest black neighborhoods. Developers are tearing down homes and pushing people out. Is this the Charleston we want? Hashtag Eastside Charleston, hashtag housing justice. 23 million views. National news pickup. A Meridian Property Group spokesperson issued a statement. "We are committed to responsible development that benefits all community members." The statement was 8 sentences long and said nothing. For Micah, the exposure was a double-edged blade. His face was now national news. His location was pinpointed. His name was public. 3 months of operational invisibility, shattered by a movie star's good intentions. But the visibility also created a shield. Meridian couldn't touch him openly. Not while cameras and journalists circled the East Side like vultures waiting for the next confrontation. Any overt act against the sympathetic homeless man who'd saved a celebrity's dog would be public relations suicide. So they went underground. There's something about Micah that nobody in this story has figured out yet. And when they do, it's going to change everything. Don't miss a second of what comes next. Night, March 22nd, 11:17 p.m. Micah was in the abandoned van behind the Salvation Army. Duke was asleep on a folded blanket. The van's side door was propped open 2 inches for airflow. Spring in Charleston was warm enough that ventilation mattered more than insulation. He heard them before he saw them. 2 sets of footsteps, measured, not rushing. The confident pace of men who believed they were approaching someone powerless. The van door wrenched open. Brock Tully. And behind him, Lot, the younger security guard, crew cut, the one who'd been riding shotgun on the neighborhood patrols. Lot held a flashlight. Brock held nothing, which was worse because it meant his hands were free. "Social media can't help you out here." Brock's voice was low, conversational. The tone of someone who had done this before and found it unremarkable. "No cameras, no movie stars, just us." Duke woke, growled, a low, sustained sound that vibrated through the van's metal floor. Micah placed a hand on the dog's back, steadied him. "You need to leave. We need you to leave." Brock reached into the van and grabbed Micah's backpack strap, yanking it, and Micah, toward the opening. Micah's shoulder caught the doorframe. Pain shot down his arm. He twisted, got his feet under him, and stepped out of the van onto the asphalt rather than being dragged. Brock shoved him, both hands on the chest, hard. Micah's back hit the chain-link fence behind the Salvation Army's loading dock. The impact rattled the fence and sent a metallic ringing into the empty lot. "You know what your problem is?" Brock stepped closer. His breath was hot and sour. "You don't know when you're not wanted. This isn't your neighborhood. These aren't your buildings. And Sterling Cade isn't going to save you at midnight behind a dumpster." Lot circled to Micah's right, cutting off the exit toward East Bay Street. The geometry was deliberate. 2-on-1, enclosed space, no witnesses. Textbook intimidation. Brock swung. A right hook, fast for a man his size, aimed at the side of Micah's head. The kind of punch that ends conversations and starts hospital visits. Micah's left forearm came up, not a flinch, not a duck. A block. Precise, angled, the radius bone absorbing the impact along its length and deflecting the fist past his ear. The technique was clean. Practiced. Drilled into muscle memory through repetition that went far beyond anything a person learned on the street. Brock's fist hit air. His momentum carried him forward. For half a second, he was off balance, exposed, and Micah could have, with the same precision that produced that block, driven a counterstrike into the exposed ribcage or dropped him with a knee to the thigh. He didn't. Instead, Micah stepped back. Hands up. Open palms. The universal gesture of de-escalation, delivered with the controlled breathing and planted stance of someone trained to escalate and choosing not to. "I don't want this," Micah said. His voice was steady. No adrenaline shake. No fear. "Walk away." Brock stared at him. The confusion was visible. The mental recalculation of a man who had expected to hit a target and found something else entirely. Homeless men did not block punches with forearm techniques. They didn't plant their feet in fighting stances. They didn't speak with the flat, command-tone calm of someone who had practiced the sentence, "walk away," until it sounded like both an invitation and a warning. "Who the hell are you?" Brock's voice had changed. The menace was still there, but underneath it, something new. Uncertainty. the first crack in the assumption that Micah Langston was what he appeared to be. Lott grabbed Brock's arm. "Not here, not now, he's all over the internet." The words were a leash. Brock let himself be pulled, but his eyes stayed on Micah, locked, measuring, filing away the block, the stance, the calm, as Lott steered him back toward the Meridian truck parked on the street. Doors opened, closed, engine started. Headlights swept the lot as the truck pulled away, and Micah was alone. He stood in the dark, breathing controlled, 3-count inhale, 3-count exhale. His left forearm throbbed where the punch had landed. Brock was strong, and blocks absorbed force even when they redirected it. There would be a bruise tomorrow. Evidence. Duke was at his feet, pressing against his leg, whimpering softly. Micah knelt, scratched behind the dog's ear. "I know, buddy, I know." Then he reached into his backpack, past the journal, past the phone he carried every day, into a hidden pocket along the inner lining, velcroed shut, invisible from the outside, and pulled out a second phone. Smaller, older, burner. He dialed a number from memory. Contact logged. Physical assault, 2 subjects, approximately 11:40 p.m. Location: rear of Salvation Army, East Bay Street. Primary aggressor: Brock Tully, Meridian Security. Secondary: surname Lott. First name unknown, same affiliation. Need extraction contingency updated. Also, he paused, looked at the bruise already forming on his forearm. Request authorization to accelerate timeline. Cover is degrading. Recommend moving to Phase 2 before the month ends. He listened. Copy. Langston out. He hung up, powered the phone off, returned it to the hidden pocket, zipped the backpack closed. Whoever he had called, whatever Phase 2 meant, the conversation lasted less than 90 seconds, but the language was unmistakable to anyone who understood operational communication. Contact logged. Extraction contingency. Authorization to accelerate timeline. Cover is degrading. These were not the words of a homeless man. These were not the words of anyone who lived in abandoned vans by choice. But in the dark, behind a Salvation Army, with a bruise spreading across his forearm and a dog leaning into his warmth, Micah Langston looked exactly like what everyone believed him to be. Alone, vulnerable, and running out of places to hide. The receipts had been accumulating for months. Quiet, methodical. The kind of evidence that didn't announce itself, that sat in files and folders and encrypted drives waiting for the moment when accumulation became overwhelming. March 23rd. Micah sat in the abandoned van with his journal open and his daily phone set to airplane mode. Duke slept. The shelter was closed. It was Sunday, and Palmetto only served breakfast Monday through Saturday. He'd eaten a gas station sandwich and an apple that Eustache had left in the usual bag. He worked through the documents he'd been assembling. Not physically. The originals were elsewhere, secured through channels that no one in this neighborhood knew existed. But the journal contained reference numbers, timestamps, cross-references, a master index of evidence organized with the precision of someone who understood chain of custody and admissibility standards. 911 call transcript. Date: February 28, 2025. Time: 9:14 a.m. Dispatch ID: Charleston-227. Caller: Odalis Benning. Report: water shut off without notice. No missed payments. Dispatch response: referred to utility company. No officer dispatched. Call duration: 4 minutes 12 seconds. That call had been logged, filed, and forgotten. A 74-year-old woman's plea for functioning plumbing. Processed, categorized, discarded. One data point. Meaningless in isolation. But Micah had 11 similar calls from East Side residents. 11 water shutoffs, 11 referrals to the utility company, 0 officer dispatches, 0 follow-ups, all within properties that Meridian had flagged for acquisition. Pattern: email correspondence. Obtained, not by Micah personally, but through a mechanism he did not discuss and would not discuss until the appropriate authority was ready to act. From N. Creel, Meridian Property Group, to P. Howell, City Housing Bureau. Date: March 1st, 2025. Subject: Calhoun Street timeline. Body: Preston. Need the condemnation paperwork filed before end of week. The board wants that parcel cleared by April for the Phase 3 demo permit. Let me know what you need from our end. A private company directing a public official to condemn occupied buildings on a corporate timeline. Not a request, an instruction. Howell's inspection logs. Charleston Housing Bureau Inspection Report. Case number HB-25-0-3-12. Property: 44 Calhoun Street. Inspection date: March 18, 2025. Method: remote assessment. Inspector: Preston Howell. Finding: imminent structural failure. Attached documentation: none. No interior photographs. No soil or foundation test results. No engineering assessment. No contractor bid for remediation. A condemnation order issued without evidence. Rubber stamped by an inspector who never set foot inside the building he declared unsafe. Micah had 12 such orders, 12 properties, 9 inspected by remote assessment only, all 9 condemned, all 9 owned by long-term black residents who had refused Meridian's buyout offers. The false police report. CPD-25-0-3-22-0-4-7. Anonymous tip. Alleging unlawful entry at 320 King Street by an individual matching Micah's description. Submitted March 22nd at 4:47 p.m. Cross-referenced with Palmetto Street Shelter sign-in log. Micah Langston signed in at 4:07 p.m. on March 20th. Signed out at 7:02 a.m. on March 21st. Security camera confirmed. Continuous footage. No gaps. The report was false. The alibi was airtight. The question was not whether Micah had broken into the King Street property. He hadn't. But who had filed the report and why? The answer to the first question was something Micah already knew. The proof of it was something he was still building. And then the connection that tied it all together. A dinner. March 21st. Private dining room at Fig Restaurant, downtown Charleston. Attendees: Alderman Grady Sims, Chair of the City Council's Housing Committee; Nadine Creel, Meridian Property Group; Vivian Lockhart, Eastside Neighborhood Association; Brock Tully, Meridian Security. No public meeting notice filed. South Carolina's Freedom of Information Act, Section 30-4-80, required that any meeting between a public official and parties with business before their committee be noticed at least 24 hours in advance and open to public attendance. No notice was filed. The meeting was private. The subject, according to a reservation note obtained through means Micah would eventually have to disclose, was Phase 3 acquisition timeline. 4 people: 1 alderman, 1 property company executive, 1 neighborhood association president who was also a paid Meridian consultant, 1 private security contractor who had assaulted Micah 48 hours earlier. They were all in the same room, planning the same thing. And none of them knew that every piece of it, the emails, the inspection logs, the false report, the dinner reservation, was being collected, cataloged, and prepared for presentation by the young man they'd dismissed as a homeless drifter. Sterling Cade showed up at the shelter on March 24th with someone Micah hadn't expected: Carmen Estrada, investigative reporter, Charleston Post and Courier, 31, Dominican American, 5 years on the housing and development beat. She'd filed 4 FOIA requests with the city regarding Meridian's demolition permits in the past 6 months. All 4 were still pending review. Sterling introduced her like he was introducing a solution. Carmen's been investigating Meridian for months. She wants to hear your story. They sat in the shelter's empty common room. Breakfast was over, lunch was hours away, the space between meals belonging to whoever had nowhere else to go. Carmen had a recorder on the table, a notebook, the focused intensity of someone who had been circling a story for months and could feel the shape of it just beyond her reach. Micah, I've been tracking Meridian's displacement pattern across the east side. Condemnation orders that don't match building conditions, utility shutoffs timed to acquisition offers, property tax reassessments that coincide with development permits. I've documented 14 cases, but I can't get anyone on the record. People are afraid. Micah listened. His hands were folded on the table. His expression was attentive but closed, the face of someone taking in information without giving any in return. I'm not asking you to go on the record today. I'm asking if you've seen anything. Living in these buildings, walking the neighborhood, you've been inside the system they're trying to dismantle. Anything you can tell me would help. I appreciate the concern, and I appreciate what you're doing. Micah paused. His words were chosen with care that Carmen noticed but couldn't categorize. But I'm just trying to stay dry. Carmen studied him. The recorder's red light blinked. The building you were evicted from. 44 Calhoun. That condemnation order was issued without an interior inspection. That's a violation of the city's own code. Did you know that? I read the order. And you pointed it out to Inspector Howell. That's what I heard. Who told you that? Sources. Carmen smiled. It was a reporter's smile, warm on the surface, relentless underneath. Micah, I'm not trying to expose you. I'm trying to expose them. But I need witnesses. I need someone who can describe what's happening from inside these buildings. I can't be that person. Can't or won't? The distinction mattered. Micah met her eyes. Can't, not right now. He stood. Conversation over. Sterling looked disappointed. The generous frustration of a man who couldn't understand why someone wouldn't accept help being offered freely. Carmen looked something else. Not frustrated, curious. The particular curiosity of a journalist who has just heard someone use the phrase, not right now, instead of no. A temporal qualifier that implied the answer might change, that there was a timeline, that right now meant something specific. She left her card on the table. Micah took it. On her way out, Carmen passed the shelter's administrative office. The director, a tall, thin black man named Roland Colvin, mid-50s, who had run Palmetto Street for 11 years, was standing in the doorway. He watched Micah through the office window, with an expression that did not match the circumstances. A shelter director watched his residents with concern, with professional detachment, with the bureaucratic patience of someone managing a system that never had enough beds, enough food, enough funding. Colvin was watching Micah with deference. He stepped back into his office, picked up the desk phone, dialed. He's still here. A pause. No issues. Yes, Mr. Langston. Understood. Mr. Langston. Not Micah. Not the young man in bed 12. Mr. Langston, the formality unmistakable, the respect audible even in a single word. Carmen was already through the front door and didn't hear it. But if she had, she would have asked herself the same question that had been building in every interaction, every observation, every moment where the seams of Micah Langston's cover story pulled just slightly apart. Why does a shelter director address a homeless resident as Mr.? And that evening, as Carmen Estrada drove to her apartment and began writing the first draft of what would become a front-page investigation, as Sterling Cade sat in his hotel suite and wondered why a man sleeping in abandoned vans would refuse every form of help offered, as Brock Tully rubbed his knuckles and remembered the block that shouldn't have been possible, as Nadine Creel refreshed the police report database waiting for Micah's arrest record to appear, as Preston Howell filed 3 more condemnation orders on buildings whose owners had said no to Meridian's latest offers. The conspiracy met. Fig Restaurant, private dining room, second time in 4 days. Alderman Grady Sims arrived at 7:30 p.m. charcoal suit, gold cufflinks, the studied casualness of a politician who wanted to appear relaxed while discussing things that could end his career. Nadine was already there. Vivian arrived at 7:45, apologizing for traffic. Brock stood by the door, not seated, not eating, present in the way that muscle is present, visible, implied, available. The situation has changed. Nadine opened her laptop. On the screen, Sterling Cade's second Instagram post, 23 million views. This kid has a platform now, national media. We can't evict him. We can't arrest him. The shelter alibi killed the King Street report. And we can't ignore him, because every day he's walking around the east side taking pictures and talking to residents. Our timeline slides. Sims leaned back. What timeline? Phase 3 demolition permits. Up for review at the Housing Committee hearing March 28th. Your committee, Alderman. We need those permits approved before the fiscal quarter closes. If they're delayed, they won't be delayed. Sims's voice carried the flat certainty of someone who had already counted the votes. 3 committee members. I'm one. Doris Keller owes me a favor from the redistricting fight. That's 2. Marcus Webb is the holdout, but he's termed out in November. He won't die on this hill. And if the kid shows up at the hearing? Public comment closes before the vote. He can talk all he wants. Won't change the math. Vivian spoke for the first time. The problem isn't the hearing. The problem is the optics. If a nationally visible figure is at the hearing opposing the permits, the press coverage changes from routine development approval to city displaces homeless hero. That's a story that writes itself. Sims drummed his fingers on the tablecloth. Handle it quietly. I don't want my name anywhere near this. Quiet is what we do. Nadine closed the laptop. Brock, the building on Calhoun. How fast can you get the emergency demo crew there? 48 hours. Do it. File the permit Monday. If the kid's not in the building, there's nothing to protest. By the time the hearing happens, the lot's cleared and the conversation is about what goes there next, not what was there before. No minutes taken. No public notice filed. No record of this meeting's existence except the restaurant's reservation system and an itemized receipt that would eventually be subpoenaed. They left at 9:15 p.m., separately, at intervals. The choreography of people who understood that being seen together required explanation they preferred not to give. What none of them knew, what none of them could have known, was that the reservation, the receipt, the attendee list, and a summary of the meeting's subject matter would be logged in a federal case file within 72 hours. Case number SC-25-0-0-47, filed by an agent whose name appeared nowhere in any database they had access to. Filed by someone who had been in the room next door, not physically, not personally, but through channels and methods and authorities that the alderman and the leasing coordinator and the neighborhood association president and the security contractor could not imagine being deployed against them, because they were looking at Micah Langston and seeing a homeless man. They never once considered the possibility that the homeless man was looking back and seeing everything. The demolition crew arrived at 44 Calhoun Street at 6 a.m. on March 26th. 2 excavators, a dump truck, a foreman with a permit, stamped emergency, approved and signed by Preston Howell. Micah watched from across the street. Duke sat beside him on the bus bench, head on his paws, unbothered by the sound of the first wall coming down. The building where he'd slept for weeks, the bare mattress, the boarded windows, the door that didn't lock, folded inward with a sound like the earth swallowing something it no longer wanted. Dust rose in a column that caught the morning light and turned it yellow. Miss O'Dallas stood on her porch, 3 houses down. Her house was not on today's demolition list, but the equipment was close enough to shake the glasses in her kitchen cabinet, close enough to crack the plaster in her hallway, close enough to remind her that the distance between standing and fallen was measured in permits and politics and the decision of people she had never met. She looked at Micah across the rising dust. He looked back. Neither spoke. The demolition took 4 hours. By noon, 44 Calhoun Street was a flat lot. Concrete rubble and twisted rebar, and the smell of old wood turned suddenly to splinters. Meridian signage went up before the dust settled. Phase 3. Coming soon. Micah photographed the signage, the permit, the equipment company's name, the foreman's truck plates, everything. Then his phone buzzed. Not the daily phone, the burner. A text, encoded, brief, readable only by someone who knew the cipher. Accelerate approved. Hearing March 28th. Warrant package in transit. Field team deployed, March 27th. Acknowledge. Micah read it once, deleted it, looked at the empty lot where he used to sleep. Then he looked south, toward City Hall, toward the chamber where the Housing Committee would convene in 48 hours, toward the table where Alderman Grady Sims would sit with his 2 reliable votes and his counted math and his absolute certainty that the permits would pass without opposition. Micah had 48 hours, 2 days to bridge the distance between the person this city believed him to be and the person he actually was. The person who had been building a federal case from inside a condemned building, with a pocket journal and 2 phones and the patience of someone who understood that justice moved at the speed of evidence, not anger. 2 days. And then the people who had tried to erase him from this neighborhood would discover, in a public chamber, on the record, in front of cameras and witnesses and the particular machinery of federal authority that does not forgive and does not forget, that they had made the most dangerous mistake a person in power can make. They had looked at someone and seen only what they expected to see. They had never asked what was underneath, and underneath was coming. Miss O'Dallas called that evening. Her voice shook, not with fear, but with the accumulated weight of 41 years of watching things she loved get torn down. They're filing demolition permits for my block. 3 houses, mine, the Washburns, the Gibsons. Emergency hearing, March 28th, 72-hour notice. Micah closed his eyes. Duke pressed against his leg. I'll be at the hearing. Baby, what's one person going to do against Meridian and the city council? He didn't answer right away. Duke shifted beside him, pressing warm against his knee. Outside the van, Charleston hummed. The distant clatter of construction, the wail of a freight train crossing the Cooper River Bridge, the 1,000 small sounds of a city that had been tearing itself apart and calling it progress for 300 years. When he did speak, his voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes something very loud. More than they expect. He hung up, opened his journal, turned to the last page, the one he'd been saving. The page with no notes, no numbers, no timestamps. Just 2 lines, written in handwriting that was nothing like the unsteady scrawl he used at the shelter. Crisp, precise, federal, hearing. March 28th, 0900 hours. Warrant package, 3 targets, simultaneous execution. He closed the journal, put it in the backpack, zipped the hidden pocket where the burner phone waited for its last call. 48 hours, then the mask comes off. Part 2. The morning of March 27th began with rain, the kind of coastal downpour that turned Charleston's cobblestone streets into shallow rivers and made the construction cranes along the east side skyline disappear into gray. Micah sat in the shelter's dining area, with his tray untouched and his journal open to a page covered in reference numbers, each one corresponding to a document that existed somewhere beyond this room, beyond this neighborhood, beyond the reach of anyone who had spent the last 3 months trying to erase him. He was running out of time. Not metaphorically, literally. The Housing Committee hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. The demolition permits for Miss Odalis' block were on the agenda. Alderman Sims had his votes counted. The machinery was loaded, aimed, and waiting for someone to pull the trigger. 24 hours. Micah closed the journal, looked at the dining room, Gerald muttering box scores from a season that ended before Micah was born, Tanya braiding her daughter's hair with the distracted precision of a woman who had been waiting for housing paperwork since June, the kitchen volunteer piling extra toast on a plate for old Maurice, whose insulin was still delayed. These were the people the system was supposed to protect. These were the people it had decided were acceptable losses in the arithmetic of development and profit. He picked up his tray, ate the powdered eggs, drank the apple juice. Routine, discipline, the last morning of the performance. June noticed something. She always noticed things. The kitchen volunteer who had been feeding people at Palmetto for 9 years, who remembered everyone's name and everyone's preferences, and who had, without being asked, given Micah an extra piece of toast every morning because she had decided sometime in the first week that he needed it. "You look different today." She set another toast on his tray, uninvited, habitual. "Same as always." "No." She studied him with the directness of a woman who had learned to read people the way fishermen read water, not by what moved on the surface, but by what moved underneath. "Something's different. You look like you're leaving." The observation was precise enough to be dangerous. Micah picked up the toast, took a bite, chewed slowly. "Everybody leaves eventually, June. Not you. You've been here every single morning since December. Same time, same seat, same powdered eggs. Men who eat powdered eggs for 3 months straight without complaining aren't passing through. They're waiting for something." He looked at her. The kind of look that carried weight. Gratitude, apology, the particular sadness of someone who has been treated with genuine kindness under false pretenses and knows that the kindness was real, even if the pretenses were necessary. "Thank you for the toast, June. Every morning, I mean that." She held his gaze for a moment, then patted his shoulder, the brisk, unsentimental pat of a woman who had fed 10,000 people and learned not to ask questions whose answers would only make the feeding harder, and moved back to the kitchen line. Gerald raised a hand from across the room. "Micah, you know who won the '87 World Series?" "Twins over Cardinals. 7 games. Gerald beamed. 7 games. That's right, that's right." He returned to his tray, satisfied. The answer was accurate. Micah had memorized it 3 months ago because Gerald asked every Thursday, and consistency was cover, and cover was built from 1,000 small acts of attention that added up to something that looked like belonging. He cleared his tray, walked out. The door closed behind him. Outside, the rain was easing. Micah walked his 6-block route for the 92nd time. But today he did not photograph utility meters. Today he stopped at each condemned property and counted, not readings, not numbers, but something else. Doors, windows, points of entry that a federal field team would need to catalog when executing search warrants on multiple locations simultaneously. He was not guessing. The warrant package had been approved. 3 targets: Meridian Property Group's office on Broad Street, Preston Howell's office at the Bureau of Housing Inspection, and Nadine Creel's residence on Trad Street. 3 warrants signed by a United States magistrate judge for the District of South Carolina. 3 teams of agents who would arrive in Charleston tomorrow morning in unmarked vehicles and wait for a signal. His signal, at the corner of Calhoun and East Bay, where 44 Calhoun Street used to stand, now a flat lot of rubble and a Meridian sign. Micah stopped. Duke sat beside him, ears up, watching a heron glide over the rooftops toward the harbor. Micah pulled out his daily phone, opened the camera, took one last photograph of the empty lot. Then he scrolled through the gallery. 3 months of images, utility meters, badge numbers, condemnation orders, license plates, building exteriors before and after demolition, the sign-in sheets from 2 neighborhood association meetings, the business card Vivian had given him with community liaison, Meridian Property Group printed in gold. 3 months of evidence collected at walking speed, 1 block at a time. He closed the gallery, pocketed the phone, looked south toward City Hall, where tomorrow morning the Housing Committee would convene in a chamber that smelled like floor polish and old leather. and Alderman Grady Sims would call the meeting to order with the comfortable certainty of a man who had never been surprised in his own building. Tomorrow, Sims would be surprised. The paper trail, the one Micah had been assembling in parallel with a federal investigative team for 4 months, told a story that no one in this neighborhood had been able to prove. Not because the evidence didn't exist, but because the evidence was scattered across systems designed to keep it invisible. City inspection databases, corporate email servers, financial records buried in subsidiary accounts, meeting reservations at restaurants that catered to people who preferred their corruption, served with a wine list. Micah had spent the afternoon of March 27th in the abandoned van, organizing the reference index in his journal for the last time. Each entry linked to a document in the federal case file, a file that had been growing since December, fed by sources that included undercover observation, federal subpoenas, Treasury Department cooperation, and the kind of digital forensics that turned deleted emails into courtroom exhibits. He worked through them methodically, not because he needed to review them, he had memorized the key documents weeks ago, but because the ritual of preparation steadied him. Tomorrow would be the most consequential day of this investigation, the transition from covert to overt, the moment when the person everyone believed him to be would cease to exist, replaced by the person he had always been. That transition could not be reversed. Once the credential came out, the cover was gone. Every relationship built on the fiction of Micah the homeless drifter would be recontextualized. Every conversation, every act of kindness, every moment of apparent vulnerability revealed as operational necessity. Miss O'Dallas would learn that the young man who fixed her porch railing had been gathering evidence in her neighborhood under a false identity. Sterling Cade would learn that the man who saved his dog and refused $5,000 had refused it not out of humility, but because accepting it would have compromised a federal investigation. Eustache would learn that the leftovers he'd been leaving by the service door had been sustaining an undercover agent, not a hungry stranger. The kindness had been real. The identity had not. Whether people could hold both truths simultaneously, whether they could forgive the deception because of its purpose, was a question Micah had learned to set aside. You didn't do this work for gratitude. You did it because the alternative was watching people like Miss O'Dallas lose their homes while the people responsible held private dinners and counted votes. At 6 p.m., Micah made the call, not the burner phone. A third device, extracted from the deepest compartment of his backpack, powered on for the first time in 9 days. A government-issued encrypted mobile, serial number registered to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Office of Inspector General. The call connected in 2 rings. Langston. This is Agent Langston, confirming go for tomorrow. Hearing is scheduled for 9 a.m., Charleston City Hall, Housing Committee Chamber. I'll enter during public comment. Credential presentation at my discretion, estimated between 9:20 and 9:45, depending on the agenda sequence. He listened. Warrant teams should be in position by 8:30. Broad Street, Housing Bureau, and Trad Street. Simultaneous execution on my signal. I'll confirm by encrypted text when I'm on the record. U.S. Marshals for the hearing chamber. 2 agents, plainclothes, positioned at exits. He listened again. Evidence summary is prepared. Exhibits A through E, authenticated. I'll read them into the record during the hearing. Chain of custody documentation is with the U.S. Attorney's Office. They confirmed receipt yesterday. A pause. Then a question from the other end. Copy. My cover assessment, degraded but functional for 1 more day. The Instagram situation accelerated exposure, but did not compromise the investigation. Meridian's response, the false police report, the physical assaults, actually strengthened the case. They documented their own misconduct, trying to remove me. Another pause. Longer. Understood. Langston out. He powered down the phone, returned it to the compartment, sealed the Velcro. The call had lasted 3 minutes and 42 seconds. 3 months of sleeping on bare mattresses and eating shelter breakfasts and carrying a dog through rainstorms. And the entire operation came down to a phone call shorter than a commercial break. Duke was watching him, head tilted. The expression dogs give when they sense a change in the person they've attached to. A shift in breathing, in posture, in the electrical frequency of intention. Micah scratched behind the dog's ear. 1 more day, buddy, then we go home. The morning of March 28th arrived without drama. Clear skies, 67 degrees, the kind of Charleston spring morning that made tourists take photographs and longtime residents check the weather forecast for the next storm. Micah ate breakfast at the shelter, signed the roster, Micah Langston, for the last time. June gave him extra toast. He thanked her, meant it. He walked to the van, changed clothes, not the gray hoodie, not the torn jeans, not the donation bin boots that had carried him through 92 mornings of surveillance and documentation, and the slow, grinding patience of building a case one utility meter at a time. Navy suit, white shirt, no tie, black shoes, the real ones. The ones that had been wrapped in a plastic bag at the bottom of his backpack since December. The suit had been stored in a garment bag inside a locker at the Greyhound station on Dorchester Road, retrieved last night after the van was dark and Duke was asleep. He looked at himself in the van's side mirror. The face was the same. The body was the same. But the person looking back was different. Not because the clothes changed who he was, but because the clothes stopped hiding it. He clipped his credential case to his belt. Left side. Gold seal facing outward. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Office of Inspector General. Below it, the photograph and the name. Special Agent Micah Langston. 3 months of being invisible. 1 morning of being seen. He looked at Duke. The dog was sitting on the folded blanket, watching him with the calm curiosity of an animal that did not understand wardrobes, but understood that something fundamental had shifted. "Stay here, buddy. I'll be back." The dog lay down, rested his chin on his paws, waited. Micah walked to City Hall. Charleston City Hall sits on the corner of Broad and Meeting Streets. White stucco, columned portico, the architectural language of authority that southern cities borrowed from plantations and never gave back. The Housing Committee chamber was on the 2nd floor, a wood-paneled room with bench seating for the public, a raised dais for the committee members, and a speaker's podium centered between the two. At 8:45 a.m., the room was already filling. Residents from the east side, Miss O'Dallas in the front row, wearing a blue dress she saved for Sundays and funerals and moments when dignity required formal expression. The Washburns beside her, Marcus and Lorraine, married 40 years, their house on the demolition list. Mrs. Gibson, 81, in a wheelchair pushed by her granddaughter, who had driven from Columbia at 5 a.m. because some things required physical presence. On the other side of the room, Meridian's attorney, a tall white man in a charcoal suit whose nameplate read Graham Wexler, and Pike, LLP. Beside him, Nadine Creel in business attire, the leasing coordinator who had filed the false police report, the woman who had orchestrated the dinner at Fig, the person whose emails to Preston Howell constituted the clearest evidence of conspiracy in the case file. She looked composed, confident. The expression of someone who believed the outcome was predetermined. Vivian Lockhart was 3 rows back, seated next to a man Micah didn't recognize. Possibly Meridian's communications director, possibly a lobbyist, possibly just another body in the architecture of institutional support. Brock Tully stood against the wall near the main exit, arms crossed, scanning the room the way security professionals scan rooms, exits, sightlines, potential threats. He was wearing a blazer over his usual tactical pants, an attempt at respectability that didn't quite cover the knuckles. And at the center of the dais, Alderman Grady Sims settled into his chair with the unhurried ease of a man who had counted his votes and found them sufficient. Mid-60s, silver hair, reading glasses on a chain around his neck, the practiced image of public service that concealed the private calculations happening behind it. 2 other committee members flanked him, Councilwoman Doris Keller to his left, mid-50s, tight smile, the reliable vote Sims had secured through political favor, and Councilman Marcus Webb to his right, the termed-out dissenter who would vote no and change nothing. Sims tapped his microphone. "Good morning. The Housing Committee is now in session. Today's agenda includes 3 items. The first, emergency demolition permits for properties at 41, 43, and 47 Calhoun Street, East Side Corridor. Petitioner, Meridian Property Group. Graham Wexler stood, buttoned his jacket, approached the podium with the measured stride of a lawyer who billed $600 an hour and considered public hearings a formality beneath his skill set. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Meridian Property Group respectfully requests approval of emergency demolition permits for 3 residential structures on the 300 block of Calhoun Street. These properties have been inspected and condemned by the Bureau of Housing Inspection under case numbers HB-25-0-3-15, -0-3-16, and -0-3-17. Inspector Howell's reports document imminent structural failure, electrical hazards, and conditions posing danger to public safety. He placed a binder on the podium. Thick, professional. The kind of binder that implied thoroughness, even if its contents didn't survive scrutiny. Meridian has invested significant resources in the revitalization of the East Side Corridor. Phase 3 represents a continuation of responsible development that will bring modern housing, commercial space, and infrastructure improvements to a neighborhood that has been underserved for decades. We asked the committee to approve these permits on an expedited basis to prevent further deterioration and risk to public safety. He sat down. The presentation took 4 minutes, polished, rehearsed, designed to make demolition sound like charity. Sims nodded. Thank you, Mr. Wexler. Public comment period. We'll take speakers in the order they signed the comment sheet. 3 minutes each. Miss O'Dallas was first. She stood, walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone down. She was 5'2", and the previous speaker had been over 6 feet. The adjustment took a moment. The room waited. My name is O'Dallas Benning. I have lived at 43 Calhoun Street for 41 years. My husband Reuben and I bought that house in 1984 with a VA loan. He served in Korea. He died in 2011. I paid off the mortgage in 2015. Her voice was steady, practiced, not from rehearsal, but from the particular fluency of someone who had told this story enough times that the words had become smooth, the edges worn down by repetition. Last October, Meridian offered me $18,000 for my house. City assessor has it at $210,000. I said no. 2 days later, my water was shut off. Maintenance issue, they told me. 9 days. I called the city 4 times. No one came. She looked at Sims, directly. The way you look at someone, you want to remember you. In January, a man from the tax office came to my yard, didn't knock, walked around with a clipboard, took pictures, left. In February, my property taxes were reassessed, tripled, from $2,800 to $8,400, on a fixed income. A murmur from the residents' side of the room, heads nodding. The Washburns exchanging a look that said they had received the same reassessment. Now you're telling me my house is structurally unsafe. A house built on a concrete slab with hurricane ties on every rafter, by a man who was an engineer. Inspected. She held up the condemnation order, the paper shaking slightly in her hand. By remote assessment. No one came inside. No one checked the foundation. No one tested the wiring. A drone. That's what the report says. A drone decided my house is falling down. She set the paper on the podium. I'm not leaving. I'm not selling for $18,000. And I'm asking this committee to deny these permits until a real inspection, interior by a licensed structural engineer, confirms what Mr. Howell's drone thinks it saw. She returned to her seat. The applause from the residents' section was immediate and sustained. Sims let it continue for 5 seconds, then tapped the microphone. Thank you, Mrs. Benning. Next speaker. Marcus Washburn spoke, then Lorraine, then Mrs. Gibson's granddaughter, reading from a statement Mrs. Gibson had written by hand on lined notebook paper. 6 decades of residency distilled into 3 minutes that made the young woman's voice break twice. Each testimony followed the same pattern. Long-term ownership, lowball offers from Meridian, utility shutoffs or tax reassessments or condemnation orders that arrived within weeks of refusal. The pattern was visible to anyone willing to see it. The committee members' faces suggested that visibility was not the same as willingness. Sims maintained his expression of neutral attentiveness, the practiced mask of a politician who had learned that looking concerned cost nothing and committed to less. After each speaker, he thanked them with the same 4 words. Thank you for testifying. No follow-up questions. No requests for documentation. No indication that the stories he was hearing connected to each other or to the permits he was about to approve. Keller took notes, or appeared to. Her pen moved across a legal pad in motions that may have been writing or may have been the mechanical displacement of someone who needed her hands busy to avoid looking at the faces of the people she was about to vote against. Webb asked one question, to Mrs. Gibson's granddaughter. Has your grandmother been offered relocation assistance by the city or by Meridian? The young woman's answer was brief. She was offered a voucher for a motel on the highway, for 30 days, after 60 years in that house. Webb nodded, wrote something on his own pad. The nod was the kind that contained an entire career's worth of dissent. The accumulated frustration of a termed-out councilman who had spent years watching his colleagues approve things he couldn't stop, casting no votes that changed nothing, building a record that history might vindicate but the present ignored. Graham Wexler, through all of this, sat with the particular patience of a man who had watched public comment periods before and understood their function, to provide the appearance of democratic participation without altering the predetermined outcome. His binder remained closed. His expression remained neutral. When Mrs. Gibson's granddaughter broke down during her reading, he looked at his phone. Sims checked the comment sheet. Any additional speakers? A voice from the gallery. Not loud, not aggressive, but carrying the particular clarity of someone who had been silent for 3 months and had chosen this exact moment to stop. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to address the committee before the vote. Sims looked up, scanned the room, found the source. A young black man in a navy suit, standing in the third row of the public seating. No backpack, no torn hoodie, clean-shaven, credential case visible on his belt, though at this distance the seal was too small to read. Sims frowned. He didn't recognize the man, which was notable because Sims made it his business to recognize everyone who entered his chamber, a habit born of political survival and the particular paranoia of someone with things to hide. Public comment period is closed. We've heard from all registered speakers. This isn't public comment, Alderman. The room shifted. The word alderman, spoken without deference, without the softening qualifiers that citizens typically attach to elected titles, landed with the blunt weight of a dropped stone. This is a federal notification. Silence. The kind that has texture. Thick, pressurized. The silence of a room full of people who have just heard a word that changes the architecture of everything that came before it. Federal. Micah stepped into the center aisle, walked to the podium. His gait was different, not the shuffling eyes-down walk of a man navigating a world that preferred not to see him. This was direct, purposeful. The walk of someone who had arrived at the place he had been heading for 92 days. He reached the podium, did not adjust the microphone, stood at full height, 5'11", which had seemed smaller in a hoodie and seemed larger in a suit, and unclipped the credential case from his belt, opened it, placed it face up on the podium, angled so the dais could see it, gold seal on blue leather. My name is Micah Langston. I am a special agent with the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, Office of Inspector General. He let the words settle, watched them land. Sims's face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and something underneath all 3 that looked like the floor dropping out. Keller's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Webb, the dissenter, leaned forward in his chair with the sudden attention of a man who had just been handed the vindication he'd stopped hoping for. In the gallery, Nadine Creel's hand moved to her phone. Brock Tully's arms unfolded. Vivian Lockhart's smile, the permanent, performative smile that had presided over 2 neighborhood meetings and 1 private dinner, vanished, and Miss O'Dallas, in the front row, stared at the man she had watched fix her porch railing, carry a dog through a rainstorm, and photograph utility meters at 7 in the morning, and understood, in a single shattering moment, that none of it had been what she thought. Micah continued. His voice was level, formal, the cadence of someone reading from a prepared statement, though his eyes never dropped to a page. Pursuant to the Inspector General Act of 1978, as amended, and in coordination with the United States Attorney's Office for the District of South Carolina, I'm authorized to inform this body that a federal investigation designated HUD-OIG, case number SC-25-0-0-47, has been active since December 2, 2024. The investigation concerns a pattern of housing fraud, civil rights violations under 42 U.S.C. sections 3604 through 3617, and conspiracy to deprive residents of federally protected housing rights in the East Side corridor of Charleston, South Carolina. Graham Wexler was on his feet. Mr. Chairman, this is highly irregular. I object to— You may object to the United States Attorney, Mr. Wexler, not to me. The words cut Wexler's sentence in half. He stood for a moment, the posture of a lawyer who had never been interrupted in a public hearing and did not have a procedural response for federal authority appearing unannounced at a municipal committee meeting, then sat down, slowly. Micah reached into his jacket, produced a set of documents, sealed, stamped, bearing the blue ink of a federal magistrate's signature. He placed them on the podium beside his credential. I have here 3 federal search warrants, authorized by the Honorable Magistrate Judge Constance Fry of the United States District Court for the District of South Carolina. Warrant number 1, Meridian Property Group, Corporate Offices, 61 Broad Street. Warrant number 2, City of Charleston Bureau of Housing Inspection, Office of Inspector Preston Howell. Warrant number 3, Residence of Nadine Creel, 14 Trad Street. He looked at Nadine. She was white. The color had left her face with the thoroughness of a tide retreating from a beach, leaving only the flat pallor of someone who had just heard her home address read into a public record beside the word warrant. These warrants are being executed simultaneously. Micah pulled out his encrypted phone, typed a 6-character message, and pressed send. As of right now. He pocketed the phone, looked at Sims. Alderman, I respectfully request that the committee table the demolition permits for properties on the 300 block of Calhoun Street pending the outcome of this federal investigation. The evidence I'm about to present raises substantial questions about whether the condemnation orders underlying these permits were issued in compliance with federal and state law. Sims's mouth worked. No sound came out for 3 seconds. Then, the committee will need to, He looked at his colleagues. Keller's face was the particular shade of gray that accompanies the realization that a political favor is about to become a political liability. Webb was leaning back in his chair now, arms crossed, watching the dais with an expression that might have been satisfaction if it weren't so exhausted. The committee will take a brief recess to— With respect, Alderman, a recess is not necessary. I have a summary of evidence to read into the record. It will take approximately 10 minutes. The committee can then make its determination. Sims looked at the exits. Brock Tully was no longer standing against the wall near the main door. A woman in a navy blazer, dark hair, athletic build, the particular posture of federal law enforcement, had taken his position. She hadn't shown a badge. She hadn't needed to. Brock was standing 3 feet to her left, and for the first time since Micah had known him, his arms were at his sides and his hands were still. At the secondary exit, a second figure in plainclothes, male, mid-30s, same blazer, same posture. U.S. Marshals. Positioned before the hearing began. Waiting for this moment. Sims swallowed. Proceed, Micah began. Exhibit A. Email correspondence between Nadine Creel, leasing coordinator for Meridian Property Group, and Preston Howell, senior inspector for the Charleston Bureau of Housing Inspection. Obtained via federal subpoena issued January 15, 2025, served on Meridian's email server provider. Authenticated by the FBI's Digital Forensics Laboratory, Charleston Field Office. Report dated March 20, 2025. Lab reference number CF-25-0-2-18. He paused. Let the authentication details register. Chain of custody was not dramatic. It was not cinematic. It was the bureaucratic scaffolding that turned information into evidence. And its presence in a public hearing signaled that this was not a complaint. This was a prosecution. 37 emails over 4 months, November 2024 through February 2025. The emails document coordination between Meridian and Inspector Howell regarding the timing and targeting of condemnation orders on occupied residential properties in the East Side Corridor. The earliest email, dated November 12, 2024, reads in relevant part. Preston, the Phase 3 timeline requires 4 parcels cleared by Q1 2025. Attached is the priority list. Let me know what inspection schedule works for your office." End quote. Inspector Howell's response, dated November 14th. Received. I can expedite if you handle the utility referrals. Easier to condemn when services are already disconnected. End quote. The room was silent. Not the silence of attention, the silence of people understanding, in real time, what had been done to them and by whom. Nadine Creel stood up. Her chair scraped the floor, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed in the chamber. Graham Wexler grabbed her arm, whispered something urgent. She sat back down. But the movement had been involuntary, the physical response of a body that wanted to flee before the mind could calculate whether fleeing made things worse. Exhibit B, Charleston Housing Bureau inspection records for 12 East Side properties, obtained through federal subpoena to the city of Charleston, served February 3, 2025. In 9 of 12 cases, condemnation was issued based solely on remote assessment, drone imagery, and exterior thermal scanning, without interior inspection. This is a violation of the International Property Maintenance Code, Section 104.3, which requires interior access and physical documentation of structural deficiencies before a condemnation finding can be issued. Inspector of record in all 9 cases, Preston Howell. Micah placed a printed sheet on the podium. The 9 case numbers, the 9 addresses, the 9 families. All 9 properties are owned by long-term residents, residency ranging from 19 to 47 years. All 9 owners are black. All 9 received purchase offers from Meridian Property Group within 60 days prior to condemnation. All 9 refused. The correlation was not subtle. It was not ambiguous. It was the kind of pattern that defense attorneys would spend months trying to explain away, and that a jury would understand in 30 seconds. Exhibit C, financial records obtained through cooperation with the United States Department of the Treasury, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Wire transfers totaling $84,000 from Meridian Property Group subsidiary accounts, specifically Eastside Development Partners, LLC, a Delaware-registered limited liability company, to a personal checking account at First Federal Savings, account holder, Preston Howell. Transfers occurred between September 2024 and February 2025. 11 payments. Average amount, $7,636. No corresponding invoices, contracts, or service agreements exist in either Meridian's or Howell's records. $84,000. Paid to a city inspector who was condemning homes on Meridian's schedule. The connection required no explanation. Sims leaned forward. Agent Langston, I want to be clear. Is the city itself under investigation? The question was personal, dressed as institutional, but personal. What Sims was really asking, am I under investigation? The investigation is focused on the individuals and entities I have named. The city is not a target at this time. Micah paused. The pause was deliberate, long enough for the qualifier "at this time" to reach every ear in the room. However, the evidence does include documentation of meetings between public officials and parties with business before their committees that were not noticed under South Carolina's Freedom of Information Act. Sims sat back. His fingers gripped the edge of the dais. Exhibit D. Video and audio recordings captured during the course of this undercover investigation, documenting physical assault by Meridian security personnel on March 22, 2025, at approximately 11:40 p.m., rear parking area of the Salvation Army facility on East Bay Street, Charleston. The recordings show two Meridian employees, Brock Tully and a second individual identified as Ryan Lott, physically assaulting a federal agent during the course of his official duties. Micah looked at Brock, standing against the wall, hands at his sides, the woman in the navy blazer 2 feet away. The distance between them was not accidental. The assault included forced removal from a vehicle, a shove against a chain-link fence, and an attempted strike to the head, which was deflected. The encounter was recorded via body-worn surveillance equipment, authorized under federal operational protocol. The recording has been authenticated and is included in the warrant application supporting today's search of Meridian's offices. Brock's face did not change, but his body did. The particular stillness of a large man who has just learned that the person he hit was wearing a wire, that the darkness he counted on was illuminated, that the thing he did at midnight behind a dumpster was now a federal exhibit with a case number and a chain of custody leading directly to a courtroom. Exhibit E. Documentation of a false police report filed March 22, 2025, with the Charleston Police Department, anonymous tip line, alleging unlawful entry at 320 King Street by a person matching the description of Agent Langston. The report was fabricated. Agent Langston was present at the Palmetto Street shelter during the time frame alleged in the report, confirmed by shelter sign-in logs and continuous security camera footage. Forensic voice analysis conducted by the FBI's Audio Laboratory, report dated March 25, 2025, lab reference number AU-25-0-1-44, confirms that the voice on the anonymous tip call matches audio samples of Nadine Creel, obtained through court-authorized surveillance. Nadine Creel did not move, did not stand, did not reach for her phone. She sat perfectly still, the way a person sits when every option, speaking, leaving, denying, makes things worse, and the only remaining choice is to wait for a lawyer to arrive and begin the long process of damage control. Micah gathered the documents, stacked them neatly, placed them beside his credential on the podium. Mr. Chairman, the evidence I've summarized represents a portion of the material supporting HUD-OIG, case number SC-25-0-0-47. The full case file has been transmitted to the United States Attorney's Office for the District of South Carolina. Grand jury proceedings are anticipated. I respectfully request again that this committee table the demolition permits pending the resolution of this investigation. Silence. 10 seconds. 20. Then Councilman Webb spoke. I move to table the demolition permits for 41, 43, and 47 Calhoun Street indefinitely. Keller looked at Sims. Sims looked at the table. The mathematics of the vote had changed, not because the numbers were different, but because voting to approve demolition permits in a room where a federal agent had just presented evidence of fraud, bribery, and civil rights violations would transform a political favor into a criminal exposure. I second the motion, Keller said. Her voice was thin. All in favor, Sims said. The word came out hoarse. 3 hands, unanimous. The permits are tabled. This hearing is... The committee will recess pending... Sims removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes. The committee is adjourned. The gavel came down, not with authority, with surrender. The room erupted, not with shouting, with the particular chaos of people who had been holding their breath and suddenly remembered how to exhale. Miss Odalis was on her feet. The Washburns were holding each other. Mrs. Gibson's granddaughter was crying into her phone, telling someone in Columbia what had just happened. Meridian's attorney was already on his phone, walking toward the exit with the rapid stride of a man who needed to contact his client before his client contacted the press. Nadine Creel remained seated. Graham Wexler leaned over and said something to her. 3 words inaudible, and she nodded once, mechanically, the nod of a person who was no longer making decisions, but receiving instructions. Vivian Lockhart was gone. Her seat was empty. She had left during Exhibit C, the financial records, the wire transfers, the $12,000 in community liaison payments that hadn't been mentioned yet, but existed in the case file and would eventually find their way into a FOIA response that Carmen Estrada had already filed. And Brock Tully was standing very still against the wall, while the woman in the navy blazer spoke to him quietly, her hand resting, not on his arm, not restraining, just resting, on the strap of the bag she carried. The gesture said, "You are not under arrest, yet. But I am here, and I will be here for as long as this takes." Brock's face worked through something, the muscles along his jaw tightening and releasing in a rhythm that suggested words being swallowed rather than spoken. He looked across the chamber at Micah. The distance between them was 40 feet. The same man he'd grabbed outside the Belmond. The same man he'd shoved against a chain-link fence at midnight. The same man whose punch he'd tried to land in the dark behind a Salvation Army. That man was now standing at a podium with a federal credential and 3 search warrants, and the look in Brock's eyes was not anger. It was the sick, vertiginous recognition of a person who has just realized that every act of intimidation he committed over the past 3 months was recorded, cataloged, and filed under a case number by the person he was intimidating. He took 1 step toward the main exit. The woman in the navy blazer shifted her weight, imperceptibly, just enough to close the gap between her body and the doorframe. She still hadn't shown a badge. She still hadn't spoken above a whisper. The authority was physical, geometric, and the simple fact of a trained body positioned between a subject and an exit. Brock stopped, returned to his position against the wall, and stayed. In the front row, Miss Odalis had not moved since Micah produced the credential. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on the man at the podium, the man she had invited onto her porch, whose odd habit of photographing utility meters she had noticed but not questioned, whose answer to "Who are you?" had been "The guy who fixed your railing." And the expression on her face was not joy, not relief. It was something more complicated and more painful, the realization that she had been protected by a lie, and that the lie had been necessary because the truth, told sooner, would have endangered both of them. She understood this. She did not like it. Both things were true. Outside City Hall, the machinery had already begun. 3 unmarked sedans were parked on Broad Street, 60 yards from Meridian's corporate office. Agents, federal, not local, moved through the building's front entrance carrying document boxes and digital imaging equipment. The receptionist at the front desk watched them with the particular helplessness of a person whose employer had just become a subject rather than a client. At the Bureau of Housing Inspection, a second team had arrived. Preston Howell's office, 2nd floor, corner, window overlooking the parking lot where he kept the city truck with his name stenciled on the door, was being photographed, cataloged, and systematically emptied of its contents. Computer towers, filing cabinets, the corkboard behind his desk where he'd pinned a calendar with dates circled in red, dates that, investigators would later confirm, corresponded exactly to the condemnation orders challenged in Micah's testimony. Howell himself was not present. He had called in sick that morning, a decision that suggested either coincidence or awareness that today was not a day to be found at his desk. 2 agents drove to his home in Mount Pleasant. He answered the door in a bathrobe, saw the badges, the warrant, the words, United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, Office of Inspector General. His wife stood behind him in the hallway, holding a coffee mug, her face cycling through confusion and fear, and the dawning comprehension that the phone calls her husband had been making in the garage late at night had not been about overtime. Howell said nothing. His attorney had not yet been contacted. He was advised of his rights, not Miranda because he was not in custody and was not being interrogated, but the standard federal advisement that he had the right to have counsel present during any voluntary interview. He declined to speak. The agents executed the search. Boxes of files, a personal laptop, a desk drawer containing 4 prepaid gift cards, Visa, $500 each, still in their packaging. Their source would be traced. Their presence would be documented. Their existence in the desk of a city inspector earning $62,000 a year would be presented to a grand jury as evidence of income inconsistent with his salary. At 14 Trad Street, Nadine Creel's residence, the third team executed its warrant with the particular thoroughness reserved for subjects who had been identified as cooperating witnesses in the making. Nadine's attorney had already called the U.S. Attorney's Office, 45 minutes after the hearing, before the agents finished cataloging the first room, to discuss the terms under which his client would provide testimony in exchange for a reduced charge. The system moves slowly, but when it moves on all fronts simultaneously. Sterling Cade watched from across Meeting Street. He stood on the sidewalk in a baseball cap and sunglasses, the disguise of a famous person who didn't want to be recognized, which never worked but always suggested effort, and stared at the federal vehicles outside City Hall with the expression of someone reassembling a story he thought he already understood. The homeless man, the torn hoodie, the dog carried through the rain, the refusal of $5,000, the phrase, "I'd rather not have anything documented," the social media post that had made Micah famous and nearly destroyed his cover. All of it, every gesture, every refusal, every moment of apparent vulnerability, recontextualized in the time it took to say the words, "special agent." He pulled out his phone, called Rhea. "The kid with my dog." His voice was quiet. Stunned. He was the one investigating the whole time. A pause on the other end. "Yeah." Sterling exhaled. "Yeah, I know." He hung up, stood on the sidewalk for another minute, then crossed the street toward the Post and Courier building, where Carmen Estrada was already writing the first paragraph of the story that would run above the fold tomorrow morning. Carmen had arrived at City Hall at 9:15, late because no one had told her the hearing was anything other than a routine permit review. By the time she reached the chamber, Micah was reading Exhibit B. She stood in the doorway and listened to a federal agent dismantle the story she had been trying to build for 6 months, using evidence she had been unable to obtain through channels she did not have access to. The emotions were complicated. Relief that the story was breaking, frustration that she hadn't broken it, professional admiration for the scope of the investigation, and underneath it all, the particular sting of realizing that the quiet young man who had sat in her presence and said, "I'm just trying to stay dry," had been, at that exact moment, the single most informed person in the city about the subject of her investigation. She would sort out the emotions later. Right now, she had a story, she had sources, she had federal documents being read into a public record, and she had 6 months of her own FOIA requests that would now be processed with the kind of urgency that only accompanies the realization that the federal government is already inside the building. The front page was waiting. Micah exited City Hall at 10:22 a.m. The hearing had lasted 87 minutes. The aftermath would last years. He stood on the steps in the spring sunlight, navy suit, credential on his belt, the particular stillness of someone who had been moving undercover for 92 days and had just stopped. The transition was physical, almost gravitational. The weight of the performance lifting, the muscles that had held the posture of vulnerability releasing, the face that had been carefully blank for 3 months settling into something that looked, for the first time, like his own. Miss Odalis was at the bottom of the steps. She had waited. Through the chaos of the adjournment, through the reporters converging on the exits, through the federal vehicles pulling up to Broad Street. She had waited because she needed to see him. Not the agent, not the credential, but the person who had knelt on her porch with a hammer and nails and fixed a railing that Meridian had ignored for 6 months. He walked down to her, stopped 1 step above so they were nearly eye level. She stared at him. The navy suit, the badge, the face she had trusted, the recognition was total. He was the same person. He was a completely different person. Both truths occupied the same space, and neither canceled the other. "You fixed my porch railing?" "Yes, ma'am, I did." The words carried everything he could not say. That the railing had been real, that the kindness had been real, that the documentation had been real, and that the combination of all three was what the law looked like when it worked the way it was supposed to. Not from a distance, not from a courtroom, from inside the neighborhood, on the ground, with a hammer in one hand and a journal in the other. Miss Odalis's eyes filled. She did not cry. She blinked once, nodded. The nod contained 41 years of watching her neighborhood get taken apart, and this one morning of watching someone try to put it back together. She didn't hug him, didn't thank him, didn't ask for explanations, just nodded and walked back to the Washburns, who were waiting beside Marcus's truck to drive her home, to her house, which was still standing. The weeks that followed moved at the speed of institutions, which is to say, slowly, imperfectly, and with the particular frustration of progress that never feels fast enough for the people who need it most. Preston Howell was indicted by a federal grand jury on April 14th. 3 counts. Conspiracy to commit housing fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 371. Bribery of a public official under 18 U.S.C. Section 201. Deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. The civil rights charge, the one that carried the weight of what those condemnation orders had actually done to real people in real houses. Howell was arrested at his home in Mount Pleasant at 6 a.m., released on $50,000 bond by noon. His attorney filed motions to suppress the email evidence within a week, arguing that the federal subpoena to Meridian's email provider exceeded the scope of the investigation's original authorization. The motion would be briefed, argued, and decided over the next 3 to 5 months. If denied, trial was estimated for October at the earliest. If granted, if the emails were suppressed, the prosecution would continue, but weakened. The financial records and inspection logs would remain, but the direct coordination between Creel and Howell would become harder to prove. That was the reality of federal prosecution. Not clean, not fast, not guaranteed. Nadine Creel cooperated. Her attorney negotiated a plea agreement within 2 weeks of the hearing. 1 count of conspiracy, maximum 5 years. Sentencing deferred pending her cooperation as a government witness. She would testify about the coordination between Meridian and the Housing Bureau, about the false police report, about the private dinners at Fig Restaurant where demolition timelines were discussed over appetizers and wine. In exchange, the U.S. Attorney's Office agreed to recommend a reduced sentence, likely probation, possibly home confinement. The disparity between what she had done and what she would face was the arithmetic of cooperation. The system traded punishment for information, and information was worth more than satisfaction. Brock Tully was arrested on state charges, assault and battery in the 3rd degree under South Carolina Code, Section 16-3-600. The arrest was made by Charleston PD, not federal agents, based on the body-worn surveillance recordings from March 22nd. Tully was processed, photographed, fingerprinted, and released on personal recognizance within 4 hours. His attorney, provided by Meridian, then hastily replaced by a private criminal defense lawyer when Meridian's legal department realized that paying for Tully's defense created an additional liability, filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the recordings were obtained through deceptive means and that Tully had no way of knowing his victim was a federal agent. The motion was pending. It would probably fail. The law did not require Tully to know who Micah was, only that Tully had committed an assault. The agent's identity was irrelevant to the elements of the offense, but probably was not, certainly. And in the space between those two words, Brock Tully remained free, employed by no one, and living in an apartment on James Island where his neighbors did not know what he had done in the dark behind a Salvation Army. Meridian Property Group fired him. Quietly. No public statement, no press release. The termination letter cited conduct inconsistent with company standards, a phrase broad enough to cover everything and specific enough to admit nothing. Vivian Lockhart resigned from the East Side Neighborhood Association on April 2nd. Her resignation letter was 3 sentences long and referenced personal reasons. No mention of the $12,000 in community liaison payments she had received from Meridian over 2 years. Payments that appeared in the case file but had not yet resulted in charges. The payments were under review by the U.S. Attorney's Office, which meant they might become charges or might become nothing, depending on whether Nadine Creel's testimony corroborated what the financial records suggested. Vivian retained a lawyer. The lawyer issued a statement. Ms. Lockhart provided legitimate consulting services to Meridian Property Group. She has not been charged with any offense and denies any wrongdoing. The statement was accurate. Whether it would remain accurate was a question the investigation had not yet answered. Alderman Grady Sims, the most senior figure in the conspiracy and the one furthest from accountability. Sims recused himself from all housing-related committee business on April 1st, the day after Carmen Estrada's front-page story in the Post and Courier detailed his attendance at the Fig Restaurant dinners. The city's Ethics Commission opened a preliminary investigation under Charleston Code of Ordinances, Section 2-160, which prohibited public officials from participating in decisions affecting parties with whom they had undisclosed financial or professional relationships. The investigation was expected to take 6 to 12 months. Sims hired a private attorney, a former state prosecutor with a specialty in government ethics cases, and issued a statement through his counsel office. I have cooperated fully with all inquiries and have done nothing wrong. I look forward to the Ethics Commission's review, which I am confident will confirm that my actions were consistent with the public trust. He remained in office. He continued to vote on non-housing matters. He attended council meetings and ribbon cuttings and community events, and the only visible change in his routine was the absence of Nadine Creel, Vivian Lockhart and Brock Tully from the rooms where he operated. The system protects its own, not always through corruption, sometimes through inertia, through procedure, through the simple arithmetic of time. Investigations take months, hearings take years. Consequences, when they arrive for some and not for others, in degrees that reflect not the severity of the offense, but the proximity of the offender to power. Sims was proximate. Sims would likely survive. Whether survival constituted justice was a question the system did not ask. Meridian Property Group, the corporate body at the center of the scheme. HUD suspended Meridian's participation in all federal housing programs on April 8th, a bureaucratic action that translated to millions of dollars in lost subsidies, tax credits, and grant eligibility. The suspension was provisional, pending the outcome of the investigation, and could be lifted if Meridian demonstrated corrective action satisfactory to the department. The demolition permits for the Calhoun Street properties were revoked by the Housing Committee on April 10th. Sims absent, Webb and Keller voting unanimously. The committee cited questions regarding the integrity of the underlying inspection process, a diplomatic phrase for the inspections were faked and we all know it. The U.S. Attorney filed a civil suit under the Fair Housing Act, 42 U.S.C. Section 3613, on behalf of displaced Eastside residents. The suit named Meridian Property Group, Eastside Development Partners LLC, and 3 unnamed corporate officers. It sought compensatory damages, injunctive relief, prohibiting further displacement activity, and a consent decree establishing federal oversight of Meridian's development practices in the Charleston metropolitan area. Settlement negotiations were expected to begin within 90 days. Meridian's attorneys, a team of 4 from a national firm, had already signaled willingness to discuss terms. The calculus was simple. A trial meant public testimony, discovery, depositions, and the kind of sustained media attention that turned corporate misconduct into brand destruction. A settlement meant a check, a consent decree, and a communication strategy that reframed the payment as commitment to community partnership. Miss Odalis' water had been restored on March 29th, the day after the hearing. A city crew arrived at 7 a.m., replaced a valve that had been malfunctioning for 9 days, and departed without explanation or apology. The water ran clear within the hour. She remained in her home. The Washburns remained in theirs. Mrs. Gibson remained in hers, for now. The condemnation orders had been vacated, the demolition permits revoked, the immediate threat neutralized. But the reassessed property taxes had not been reversed. The appeals process, separate from the federal investigation, governed by county tax court procedures that moved at their own glacial pace, would take months. And if the reassessments held, the taxes would come due in October, and fixed-income homeowners who could afford $2,800 a year could not afford $8,400, and the displacement would happen anyway, not through bulldozers, through arithmetic. That was the part of the story that didn't make the front page, the part that continued after the cameras left and the federal agents returned to their field office, and the case file moved from active investigation to prosecutorial calendar. The slow, grinding, unglamorous reality of systemic harm, which did not require conspiracy to sustain itself, only the ordinary operations of markets and assessments and deadlines that fell on people who had no margin for error. Carmen Estrada's investigation ran in 4 installments over 2 weeks. Front page, above the fold. National syndication through the Associated Press. The series documented not only the Meridian scheme, but the broader pattern of development-driven displacement across Charleston's historically black neighborhoods. A pattern that predated Meridian and would outlast it, because the incentive structure that made it profitable remained intact. Her FOIA requests, the ones that had been pending review for 6 months, were fulfilled within 11 days of the hearing. The city's sudden transparency was not coincidental. Among the documents, Meridian's parent company, a Delaware LLC called Coastal Horizon Holdings. Ownership records for Coastal Horizon led to a second LLC, Palmetto Capital Partners, registered in Wyoming. That entity's records led to a trust, Seaview Family Trust, administered by a law firm in Greenville, whose client list was protected by attorney-client privilege. The beneficial owner of the trust, the person or persons who ultimately controlled Meridian Property Group, remained unnamed. Carmen filed additional requests. Subpoenas were discussed. The U.S. Attorney's Office indicated ongoing interest in the corporate structure. But as of May, the name behind the name behind the name had not been disclosed. The investigation continued. The ownership remained hidden. Wherever the money originated, it had been laundered through enough layers of legal architecture to survive the initial exposure. There was also the matter of Exhibit F-12, a single email, buried in the 37-message chain between Creel and Howell, that referenced not Phase 3, the development stage at the center of the prosecution, but Phase 4. The email, dated January 9, 2025, read, Phase 4 timeline per RKM. Preliminary site assessment to begin Q3. 14 parcels. Full acquisition target, 18 months. RKM. The initials did not correspond to any individual named in the investigation. Not Creel, not Howell, not Sims, not any known Meridian employee or officer. 14 parcels. A number that implied a scope significantly larger than the 12 properties documented in the existing case. A second wave of displacement, planned before the first, was complete. The U.S. Attorney's Office declined to comment on Phase 4. The investigation was ongoing. The initials were a subject of interest. And the 47 seconds. Brock Tully's body-worn camera, the Meridian-issued device he wore during security patrols, had recorded continuously on March 22nd. The footage from 11:17 p.m. to approximately 11:58 p.m. should have captured the assault behind the Salvation Army. Micah's own body-worn surveillance equipment had captured it from his perspective. But Brock's camera, which would have shown the assault from the attacker's point of view, including audio of Brock's statements and any communication with Lott, contained a gap. 47 seconds. Between 11:39 and 11:40 p.m. missing. Meridian's IT department, in response to the federal warrant, provided the camera's digital storage device along with a written statement. A data corruption event was detected during routine download on March 23rd. Approximately 47 seconds of footage were unrecoverable. The corruption is consistent with a hardware malfunction, not deliberate editing. The FBI's Digital Forensics Unit was reviewing the device. The report was expected in June. 47 seconds. The exact window during which Brock's fist had swung and Micah's forearm had blocked it, and the words, "Social media can't help you out here," had been spoken in the dark by a man who believed no one was listening. Someone had edited those seconds. Someone with access to Meridian's IT systems. Someone who understood what the footage contained and what it would mean if it survived. That someone had not been identified. The investigation was ongoing. Micah returned to the east side on a Saturday in April. Not undercover. Not in the Navy suit either. Jeans, a clean t-shirt. Badge clipped to his belt because federal regulations required it during official site visits, but partially covered by the hem of his shirt. A compromise between protocol and the desire to walk through a neighborhood one more time as something close to the person he'd pretended to be. Duke walked beside him. Leash this time, a proper one, purchased from a pet store in West Ashley. The dog's paw was fully healed. He trotted with the confident energy of an animal that had been well-fed and well-loved for a month, the ribs no longer visible beneath the fur, the eyes bright. They walked the 6-block route, past the condemned buildings, some still standing, some demolished before the investigation halted the permits. Past Miss Odalis' house, where the porch railing he'd repaired stood solid and straight and the water ran when you turned the tap. Past the empty lot where 44 Calhoun used to be, where the Meridian sign still read, Phase 3. Coming soon, though? Coming soon now meant something different than it had a month ago. He stopped at the chain-link fence surrounding the lot. The strip of gray hoodie, the one he'd torn to bandage Duke's paw on a rainy night in an alley behind a demolished row house, was still tied to the fence post where he'd left it, faded by sun, stiffened by rain. A small monument to a cover story that had for a few weeks been indistinguishable from a real life. He didn't untie it, left it there. Evidence of something that couldn't be filed in a case folder, the part of undercover work that existed between the documentation and the credential, in the space where performance became experience, and experience left marks that didn't wash off with a change of clothes. His phone buzzed. Sterling Cade. Micah looked at the screen. Let it ring. He wasn't sure what to say to the man whose generosity had nearly destroyed his investigation and whose visibility may have also been the thing that kept him alive on March 22nd, because Brock's partner had pulled him away with the words, "He's all over the internet," and those words had functioned as a shield when nothing else could. The phone stopped ringing. A voicemail notification appeared. Micah would listen to it later. Or he wouldn't. Some conversations required more time than a phone call could hold. A text arrived. From Roland Colvin, shelter director, the man who had addressed a homeless resident as Mr. and made a phone call that Carmen Estrada never heard. Your bed's still here if you ever need it. See, Colvin had known. Not everything. Not the case number or the warrant targets or the evidence chain. But enough. HUD-OIG had coordinated with the shelter through back channels before the operation began, ensuring that Micah's cover identity would have a stable base of operations. Colvin had been told only what he needed to know. A federal agent would be residing at the shelter under an assumed identity. Treat him like any other resident. Maintain the fiction. And if anyone asks questions, anyone from the city, from Meridian, from the police, the answer is always the same. He's just another name on the roster. Colvin had done more than that. He had given Micah the corner seat by the emergency exit without being asked, had told June to give him extra toast, had made sure the sign-in log was pristine, timestamps accurate, handwriting legible, the kind of documentation that could survive a courtroom challenge. And he had called Micah Mr. Langston once, in a moment of reflexive respect that almost cost 3 months of work. The text was his way of saying goodbye, and his way of saying, the bet is real, even if the name on the roster wasn't. Micah read it, put the phone away, then took it back out, listened to Sterling's voicemail. Micah, it's Sterling. I don't even know what to call you now. I watched the hearing. I was outside. I saw the whole... Look, man. A pause. The sound of someone organizing complicated feelings into inadequate words. I'm sorry about the posts. I didn't know. Obviously. If I'd known, I never would have. But I didn't know, and I almost messed up your whole... Anyway. Another pause. Rhea says I should give you space. She's probably right, but I want you to know, what you did in there was the bravest thing I've ever seen in a room, and I've been in rooms with people who win Oscars for pretending to be brave. You weren't pretending. You were the real thing. The voice cracked slightly, recovered. Call me when you're ready, or don't. Either way. Duke misses you. I miss you. Take care of yourself, man. The voicemail ended. Micah stared at the phone for a moment, then pocketed it and looked at the empty lot where he used to sleep, and the neighborhood where he'd spent 92 days being invisible, and the dog that had changed everything by being lost in the right alley on the right night. He knelt, scratched Duke behind the ear. The dog leaned into his hand with the full-body trust of a creature that did not understand investigations or credentials or the difference between a cover story and a real life. Duke understood only this. The person who had pulled a thorn from his paw in the rain was still here, was still gentle, was still the same hands. Let's go home, buddy. He stood, walked to his car, a plain government sedan, the one that had been parked 2 blocks from the van for 3 months, moved every few days to avoid pattern recognition, the most boring and most honest thing he owned. Opened the passenger door. Duke jumped in, settled on the seat with the easy familiarity of a dog who had ridden in this car before, during late-night drives to the field office, to file reports that no one in the neighborhood would see until a federal agent stood at a podium and read them into the record. Micah drove south, away from the east side, away from Calhoun Street and the shelter and the bus bench where he'd watched a building get demolished and felt the ground shake under his feet. The rearview mirror held the construction cranes for half a mile, then lost them behind the trees along the river. The investigation continued. The trial dates approached. The settlements would be negotiated, the consent decrees drafted, the monitoring periods established and enforced, and eventually, years from now, concluded, with reports that said either compliance achieved or ongoing deficiencies noted, or, most likely, something in between that satisfied no one and changed just enough to matter. 3 weeks later, Carmen Estrada received a manila envelope at her desk at the Post and Courier. No return address, no postmark, hand-delivered to the newspaper's front desk by a person the receptionist described as average height, average build, couldn't tell you the face. Inside, a single page, a site map, Meridian's letterhead, labeled Phase 4, preliminary acquisition targets, 14 addresses, circled in red ink, all occupied, all in black neighborhoods, all already condemned. Carmen stared at the map. 14 new addresses, 14 new families, 14 new condemnation orders waiting to be filed by an inspector who was out on bond, and a company whose federal programs were suspended, but whose Delaware LLCs were still operational and whose beneficial owner remained, behind 3 layers of corporate architecture, unnamed. Phase 4. The investigation had exposed Phase 3, had stopped the demolition, had indicted 1 inspector and flipped 1 conspirator and opened ethics inquiries and filed civil suits and done everything the law allowed, at the speed the law permitted, with the precision the law demanded. And the machine had already moved on, had already mapped the next 14 targets, had already started the arithmetic of displacement, the offers, the refusals, the shutoffs, the reassessments, the condemnations, in neighborhoods where no federal agent was sleeping in a condemned building, and no celebrity was posting photographs, and no journalist was filing FOIA requests. Yet, Carmen picked up her phone, dialed the U.S. Attorney's office. then her editor, then a source at HUD's Office of Inspector General, whose direct line she now had because a young man in a navy suit had handed her his card on the steps of City Hall and said quietly, "Call me if you find anything else." She found something else. The work continued. The light in Carmen's office stayed on past midnight. The map spread across her desk. 14 addresses, 14 families who didn't know yet. In a government sedan heading south on Highway 17, Micah Langston drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on Duke's back. The dog slept. The road was empty. The night was warm and dark and full of the sounds of a coast that had been fought over, built up, torn down, and rebuilt for 300 years by people who believed they owned it and people who merely lived there, and the slow, grinding distance between the two. He didn't turn on the radio, didn't check his phone, just drove, and thought about 14 addresses circled in red, and wondered who was sleeping in those buildings tonight, and whether anyone was counting the days until someone noticed, and whether, somewhere in a neighborhood he hadn't mapped yet, a 74-year-old woman was sitting on her porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching a Meridian truck photograph her house, and wondering if this was the week they'd come for her water. The work continued. It always did. Not because the system was just. It wasn't. Not because the law was fast. It wasn't. Not because one investigation in one city could fix what centuries of policy and profit had broken. It couldn't. But because someone had to sleep in the condemned buildings, someone had to eat the powdered eggs, someone had to carry the journal and photograph the meters and take the punches and keep documenting, keep filing, keep building the case one receipt at a time until the weight of evidence became too heavy for even the most protected institution to carry. Someone had to be the person that power looked at and dismissed, and then refused to stay dismissed.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.